Chapter 16. The Green Drink of Despair. Albus Dumbledore waited at the edge of the wards that circled the grand Hogwarts castle. The students had left the week before, leaving the castle empty, except for the professors who preferred to summer there and the myriad ghosts and house elves who couldn't leave. His last year at Hogwarts was over, he knew. Too many things tainted his headship of the school in recent years. Too many deaths, too many doubts. If he did not respectfully retire now, he would be shamefully cast from the school within a year. He had given himself the summer to prepare, to begin the task of moving his many things to the old Dumbledore property in Godric's Hollow. Minerva McGonagall would take his place, and her new deputy would also be the new defense against the dark arts professor, Severus Snape. He would miss the grand school, her hallowed halls, the portraits he knew by name, the ghosts, the secrets he would never solve. The friendships gained over decades, the students who brought life into the ancient school, watching them grow older, forming their own friendships and bonds. But it was time for an old man to find what peace was still available to him. Headmaster. Albus turned from looking up at the magnificent height of the astronomy tower. Severus approached, cloaked in his trademark black, dark eyes as expressionless as ever. Albus met that gaze and left his mind open, pushing the destination through in a sleight of mind that only one master Legilimens could do with another. The dour wizard grimaced in response. I suppose we'll be getting wet. He had searched the old orphanage, had visited places of Tom Riddle's childhood, poring over old interviews and memories, delving deep into the mind of a burgeoning child sociopath. Countless hours in his pensive, sifting through the barest reference to any place or object that might be held sacred, have importance greater than any other. And finally, he had found something. A simple holiday for the orphanage, a trip to the sea, where a particular incident would happen between young Tom Riddle and two Muggle children that would scar them both for life. Mrs. Cole, the matron of the orphanage, had told him the children were never the same after that trip. Quiet instead of outgoing, deathly afraid of Riddle, never speaking of what happened there, their actions telling a horrible story for them. Dumbledore, returning to that seaside, had spotted the cave and felt the power emanating from it, and knew no way to get to it except through magic, its high cliffs and pounding waves making even a boat ride dangerous. He could only guess what Riddle had done there. Apparition, perhaps, if the child was as powerful then as in his Hogwarts days. Taking two children with him, alone in a cave that alone would have scared them near to death. But Riddle would not have been content simply to frighten them. Albus suspected it was the place of his first human torture, and therefore a place of fond memory and importance, where perhaps a Dark Lord might hide a piece of his soul. Here. Severus sneered, wand light spilling forth in front of them, illuminating the rocky entrance. I see no wards in place. Look for traps. Albus had known better than to come alone, and so brought with him someone who knew both Tom's personal style and had an affinity for dark magic. I'm certain it's here. He could sense the evil within, like a spider waiting still and patient for the moth to flutter closer, 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 until it was too late. Albus raised his own wand and began to stride into the darkness. Severus recognized the curse upon the small entrance within the cave first, Albus only a second later. It was simple, a work of magic probably constructed only weeks after Riddle's graduation, before he learned the finer arts of dark magic. With a conjured knife, Albus slit his palm and smeared his own blood across the door, and with the payment, the entrance opened to them. Inside, a large black lake waited, the cavern echoing with single drops of water falling from the depths to plop into the water below. Still, quiet, the spider's web. Infurious, Severus hissed, looking into the lake. I recognized their stench. He desperately wanted to keep people from that island out there. The island in question, a small sliver of rock, glowed slightly with green magical light from some basin in its center. The Horcrux would be there, protected. Albus raised a brow. And yet, I see no wards to prevent us from simply levitating across, though there are anti-apparition and transfiguration wards. He suspected no one truly powerful would discover this hiding place. Severus frowned, lifting his wand once more. We'll stay far above the water in any case. They didn't need to speak of it further. Together, they began to levitate themselves across, approaching the small island from the heights of the dark cave. Underneath the water, pale flesh occasionally glimmered in the soft phosphorescence of the water. Within the basin, Albus saw Slytherin's locket, its silver surface gleaming under the green water. Severus looked at the green substance with surprised longing. The drink of despair. I'm a bit sorrowful I was never commanded to brew it. The Dark Lord invented it himself for use in torture. I never did discover how it was constructed. Albus frowned. Any way to dispel it? Severus' wand was alight, but after only a few wordless spells, he lowered it. As I suspected, no. It can only be removed by a living being's flesh, and with the sheer amount, that would mean one of us has to drink it. The former Death Eater looked paler than normal in the dim light, and it was not called despair for nothing. Pain first, then it weakens the mind, drawing up painful memories relating to despair and guilt before causing immense thirst of which one would do anything, say anything, to quench. It made interrogation easier, if less stimulating, for the others. The last bit was said with a sideways glance at the headmaster, apology in his gaze, as he continued, and considering the inferi in the water a last trap. If the transfiguration wards prevent conjuring water, anyone who succeeded in drinking it would disturb the water around us in desperation. Dumbledore eyed the emerald potion. So, if I drank it, would you? Severus blinked, then scowled. Of course not. That would ruin what is probably the last known sample of the potion. The wizard folded his arms. Which I would like to study in my own lab. A potion that cannot be dispelled or transfigured is an anomaly seen in no other potion. A mystery I've tried to recreate 100 times over. The Slytherin turned to face the upraised pedestal, eyeing the basin atop it with narrowed eyes. Then his lips twitched into a dark smile. We will simply cut the basin free and take the entire construct with us out of this god-forsaken cave. I can study it at Hogwarts and work at removing that item you're after. Albus paused a moment. Then he rested one wrinkled hand on his professor's shoulder. My boy, is why one needs a Slytherin on one's staff. It took 3 hours of testing before Severus Snape cut a hole into the original stone basin, draining the potion out from the bowl into an identical basin below. The locket, once confirmed free of curses, was given to the headmaster, who held it in his hands and began to frown severely. And without leaving the potions lab as he had planned, he flipped the locket open with growing suspicion to see a folded paper within. It's a replica, he said simply, dropping the metal jewelry to the stone with an expression few others had ever seen on his face. He opened the paper and read aloud what was written within. A note to the Dark Lord, from someone unknown who had discovered the Horcrux and planned to destroy it. Someone who had suspected they would die in the attempt or soon after, and knew just what they were risking their lives for. Something to make the Dark Lord mortal once more. Regulus Black. Severus breathed, stepping closer. When he saw the writing, he slowly closed his eyes, shaking his head. The foolish boy. No one ever knew exactly what happened to him. I like to think he fled, one of the few to escape the Dark Lord while he was alive. The Slytherin turned to fix Dumbledore with his black gaze. Mortal. Albus waved away his question with one hand. Exaggeration, I'm sure. The item was certainly powerful and extremely difficult to destroy. I doubt, from what I remember of him as a student, he would have been capable of the feat. Where would he have hidden it if he failed? The Black Vault. Severus Snape folded his arms across his chest. His vault or the Black House, both of which cannot be entered without a black. Albus looked down at the paper in his hands, his brows drawing together with reluctance as he slowly spoke. I suppose it is good that one still remains, then. It's for your birthday, Dudley muttered, and Harry narrowed his eyes. They were standing out on the front lawn, alone. Aunt Petunia had summoned him for a family dinner, one Harry well knew was really a surprise birthday party for himself. He had recognized the same pattern of behavior from 3 years before, when a similar party had been thrown. But he wasn't at all sure why Dudley had met him outside on the front lawn, unless it was to stall him from going inside yet. Why that would include a private gift-giving, he wasn't sure. Harry ran his fingers across the rectangular object in his hand, the thing nothing but a thick block of shadows. It was roughly the size of a tape, if he wasn't mistaken, underneath smooth plastic wrapping. Why not give it to me inside? Harry asked, and Dudley groaned. I knew you would know, just like last time. Should have had it at a restaurant. The boy grumbled, then fidgeted, one foot aggressively rubbing the grass under his feet and subsequently killing it. His cousin leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "It's an audio tape." Harry flipped the thing over in his hands. He had been given audio tapes before. He owned a plethora of them, though his tape player wouldn't work in Grimmauld Place. If he wanted to listen to them, a walk outside was required. "Okay." Harry drew out the word, waiting for more of an explanation than that. Dudley killed more grass, then let out a breath. "I don't want to imply, that you're not a man." When someone said something of that nature, it usually meant they were about to refute it in the next sentence. Harry narrowed his eyes. "But here it comes. I know you haven't done it yet, so I bought your How to Sex book." As Harry stiffened in shock, Dudley rapidly continued with only a deep breath to refresh his lungs. "You have to please the women. Let me tell you, that part does not come naturally. Piers gave me, a book with pictures and stuff, but I couldn't exactly pass that on to you now, could I? And by the way you and Hermione dance around each other, I can tell, Piers can tell, everybody can tell you haven't done it." His cousin finished with a self-righteous stamp of the grass-killing foot. Harry rocked back on his feet, the staff in his hand threatening to fall from his loose grasp. He gaped at Dudley. "How did you even find something like that on audio?" Dudley's light lifted in something like a shrug. "Oh man, they have everything at those sex shops." Harry shook his head, quickly, wondering if he was hearing things. "You can't get into a sex shop. You're not old enough." Dudley snorted. "Harry, you are the only boy I know who cares a whit about the rules when it comes to getting into a store like that. I've been sneaking in since I was 14. At that, Harry remembered the true topic of this conversation, not his cousin's unsurprising criminal activity. He had had the standard talk, along with Dudley from Uncle Vernon ages ago, and one extremely embarrassing moment with Aunt Petunia, where his aunt had insisted that they both be smart and protected, unlike Mrs. Gilligan's 16-year-old son who got his girlfriend pregnant, which would embarrass her so much she couldn't show her face in public. He knew what went where and under what circumstances. He wasn't an idiot, and he had studied human anatomy far more than his cousin ever had. Harry sniffed haughtily as he spoke. "You think I need a guidebook to that?" Dudley began to laugh, then cut it off with a squeaky sound. Obviously, he was trying to preserve some of Harry's pride, but not much of it. "You won't even say it. Sex, sex, sex." Harry felt his face heat. He had missed out on a lot of the conversation most boys his age were old hats at. He had never truly been interested in the physical shapes of women, and discussing the color of their souls only made Dudley uncomfortable. By the time his cousin started talking less about looks and more about acts, Harry was far too busy with his own projects to waste much time listening to it. Now he regretted that. Harry hissed back at the teasing. "Shut it before someone hears you." His cousin knocked one hammy fist against his shoulder, throwing him off balance, and in the same second lifted another hand to steady him. Dudley never did know his own strength, but he was relatively good at mitigating the damage. "Listen, Harry, I don't know why you're waiting around, but when you finally get down to it, you gotta know what you're doing. Trust me, I've heard stories." Jessica broke up with her boyfriend because he couldn't last longer than 15 seconds, and girls take a long time to come around, if you get my meaning there. You're going to want to make a good impression. Harry wasn't sure he could get any hotter. His face felt like it was on fire. Another quick scan around at least guaranteed they were alone. If he was still being followed by aura guards, he would have put up a silencing ward from sheer self-preservation. Harry tried not to choke as he replied, "Fine." "All right, thanks." He would say anything to end this conversation. Dudley smacked him again with a good-hearted chuckle. "That's it, Harry. And if you have any questions, me and the boys can give you some tips." "No need. I mean, if I do, I know where to go." Not to Dudley or his bragging friends, that was certain. "Thanks, for the tape." As he followed his cousin inside, slipping the present into his pocket, Harry tried to regulate his breathing. When he saw Hermione's signature color, his efforts redoubled, and his smile was a bit shaky. A new worry one he hadn't really contemplated was nagging him now. Would Hermione be happy with him? Would she know what to do either? Had she read a sex book? He felt on edge the entire party, his palms sweating. Surely Hermione would understand if he didn't last. It was silly to break up over something like that. And she seemed to enjoy kissing him, and touching him too, for that matter. Still, Dudley had dated a lot more girls, and apparently gotten a lot farther along with them than Harry had. That night, when the Grangers dropped him off at Grimmauld Place, he went inside and gathered his tape player. With a quick explanation of a walk to get some fresh air to Creature, he stepped outside and pulled his headphones into place as he stood on the steps, hesitating only briefly before he clicked the button to play. It turned out to be a very long and extremely uncomfortable walk. Creature did not mind so much that the master had failed to make him a younger elf. He was quite proud of his wrinkles. His great-uncle Piccolo had always boasted that a house elf was not truly experienced until he had at least 4 age spots and 7 streaks of sagging skin. Creature was a little sad. Uncle Piccolo's head was no longer on the hallway wall to remind him of that fact when his joints ached, though. But Creature was a good elf, and the master had lessened some of his workload, insisting on shutting up some of the unused rooms before they could conscript a new elf. He was not sure how he felt about that. Training a new elf not of his blood was entirely different than raising a young kit of his own to his family's rigid standards of protocol. What if it was an elf who tried to take over his authority? What if the elf was female? Creature shuddered at the very thought. Vexing creatures always insisted on being the boss of any male elf they came across, running the house over more able and older elves who deserved distinction. Creature must insist the elf be male if the house must have another house elf. Creature placed a breakfast plate in front of the master, backing away as the young man stared into the distance, green gaze unfocused with some thought. Without looking down, the master unerringly picked up the sterling silver dinner fork. The kind Creature had learned the master used best, better than steel or wood. The plate, as well, was silver, the fine dining set that the former mistress would only deign to bring out for pureblood parties. Creature didn't bother to tell the master such details. The best for the best, as his uncle Piccolo said. It was a house elf's responsibility to learn each master and mistress without worrying them overly with details and questions. And through trial and error and a great deal of observation, Creature had learned Master Potter's preferences far better than the man himself did them, if Creature said so himself. Creature knew when the master preferred to eat, and when the master preferred to lay abed. Creature knew that the master was more likely to eat overly cooked vegetables than fresh ones, and any meat must be nearly black, or he would simply move it about his plate with a grimace. Creature knew when to launder and when to dust, when to tread softly by the master's laboratory, or when to stomp loudly to announce his presence. Creature knew not to move furniture even an inch, and he knew that the master loved to look into a fire in the hearth whenever the inkling took him. Creature considered himself an expert on all things Master Potter, so he knew that the master was upset about something, and it was not the normal research the man spent his time on, for he did not pace his office or thumb through pages with words being read aloud. He frowned into thin air and sat still instead, as he was doing now at the kitchen table, silent as the marble statues in storage upstairs, as he had been doing off and on for the past week, before leaving for long intervals on supposed walks. And Creature knew to ask for an explanation would be futile. So he did, as he had learned over the last years. He asked Miss Hermione if a house elf might be of service, and how Hermione was not a little observant herself. She hadn't missed that Harry had been busy an awful lot lately, when school wasn't even in term. When Creature appeared in her bedroom, she wasn't even that surprised. She considered the old Creature to be her informant of sorts. They were allies in a goal both strongly believed in, keeping Harry happy. The last time Harry had been acting odd, it had been about dubious research. She hoped this wasn't more of the same. She could only think of a few directions to take their studies farther than they already had, and all were unpleasant. The mere thought of true necromancy made her shudder. But while the recreation of life made her think of Frankenstein's monster, somehow the thought of true creation from nothing but air was worse. Her grandmother on her father's side had been Catholic. The older woman would have trembled at the mere notion of humanity having such power. But then again, hiss and spit was not very frightening, and still very much alive. Even aging, if the greying fur about his muzzle was any clue. So Hermione gathered her courage, steadied her nerves for potential mummies, blood rituals, or ghosts inhabiting quickened cadavers, and prepared herself to do what any good girlfriend does. Finding out what foolish idea her boyfriend had got into his head now, and setting him straight. It could have been a lot worse, Harry supposed after the fact. At the time, however, it was hands down the worst few minutes of his life when he had had to stammer to Hermione just what he had been listening to before the stubborn girl did as she threatened and put the headphones on herself. He would rather have faced down 5 more Voldemort soul slivers at the same time than Hermione at that moment. He couldn't see her expression. He was too afraid to look. Instead, he stood there, hands limp at his sides, on the sparse sidewalk 2 blocks down from Grimmauld Place, where Hermione had come up on him. He was nearly positive Creature had told on him. If so, the little monster was getting a stern talking to about keeping private matters private. "You're listening to what?" Her voice was disbelieving. Harry scowled down at his orange boots, feeling as if his ears were about to burn off his skull, followed close behind by the skin on his face. He folded his arms and told himself it wasn't a gesture of insecurity. He simply didn't know what else to do with his hands besides pull at the loose thread on his shirt. "It's a how-to book," I just said. She made a choked sound. "Yes, but a how-to what?" Harry gritted his teeth. "Why are you going to make me say it again?" His angry words were directed at his shoes. The dragonhide was impervious to them. Hermione seemed to suck in a breath and try to speak at the same time, an inarticulate sound escaping. She let out a quick breath, then another, and it didn't take a third for him to realize she was trying not to laugh. With one fierce look directed toward her swirling light, he stomped around her and began to walk back home. Harry, wait, I'm sorry." She giggled the last word, and he ground his teeth together, picking up stride. "Harry, stop this instant." The humor was gone. Harry stopped, but he didn't turn. He felt her hands a second before her scent hit him, the familiar smell of her working like a balm to his bruised pride. "I'm sorry for laughing at you. I was just expecting something very different, and your face was just so." Her hands pressed against his sides, her arms wrapping around him from behind. He felt her head press between his shoulder blades, a long sigh warming his skin through the thin shirt he wore before she continued. "It's perfectly normal to study those things. I mean, my parents are a mite traditional in that arena, but I'm sure they both don't expect me not to, that is, to experiment, with you, since we're be-boyfriend and girlfriend and, yeah, now, it was her turn to be embarrassed. Harry pulled away to turn in her arms, ignoring the colored hues that passed them at a slow, curious pace. "Have you read any books like that?" Her head was tilted down, wild hair brushing his chin as she mumbled her reply. "I guess. I used to sneak adult romances from the library when my mum wasn't looking. Not exactly the same, but I get the gist of things. I was curious." Harry snorted. "I wasn't not enough to look for something like this until Dudley hinted that you might dump me if I got it wrong." She stiffened. "That complete jerk, as if I'm that shallow." Tossed her hair, and the gesture made strands float up to stick to his face. He brushed them aside as she continued with a growl. "I bet he gave you that tape too. Well, just throw it away. We can muddle through things together, just as we've been doing. We don't need anyone to tell us how it's supposed to be. And knowing your cousin, it's probably full of impossible stories and bogus advice." Harry bit his lip, holding back a smile. "I did wonder if some of the things mentioned were anatomically possible." She laughed, leaning into him, and he tightened his arms. It felt so good to hold her there, as if they stood in their own little world. Until the real world intruded, of course, in the form of a wolf whistle from a passing group of teens. Hermione squeezed him one last time and pulled away, placing her hand tight in his as they began to meander back towards Grimmauld Place. She leaned into his side and whispered just loud enough so the words reached his ears and not those passing by. "Why don't you tell me which ones you think are impossible? I'm thinking of med school after I graduate. It might be educational." Her voice was filled with wicked humor, and Harry felt his heart begin to beat faster. He knew the smile on his face was certainly large and dopey, but he couldn't help it. He was quite certain he was in love with her. Anything to educate, of course. Harry replied, and with one sideways look into her smiling face, continued, "Though a true scientist tests his hypotheses." Hermione glanced up at him, and he saw her teeth as she grinned, before nodding solemnly. "Of course. I would never suggest we make conclusions without data to back them up." As they came to the steps, Hermione began to ascend ahead of him. He stopped her with one hand, their faces on the same level, and let his look fade away as her blue-violet light returned in swirls of excitement. How about we start on familiar ground? He asked softly, and felt her smile against his cheek before their mouths met. It took another whistle from the street behind to remind him that they were still, in fact, outside the door of Grimold Place. When he saw the swirl of yellow inside the door, Harry quite forgot why he was angry at the house elf, and only cast him an extremely happy look instead. He had paused at the base of the stairs. Hermione responded by darting past him, taking the steps two at a time, her laughter ringing down from above with a teasing lilt. He only paused a minute to think, sucking in excited breaths. Then he raced after her, heart all over, his heart thumping loudly in his ears, so hard he felt it pulsing in his fingertips. His staff was left forgotten in the hall behind him without a qualm. Harry looked as he sped down the second-floor hallway, and so saw the clothing scattered about his bedroom floor in emerald green tones. His control left him when he saw her in his bed, the sheets pulled up to her chin, a mischievous grin on her face blurring to patterned blue-violet light. He dove right in after her, the bed bouncing with his weight, thrilled when she burst into renewed laughter. Then their lips met again, warm heat and soft skin, and the colors began to run together in his mind. They lay on a tangled sea of green and brown, oceans of cotton and silk, his own clothing a hindrance she tugged at with a curse before a flicker of an orange dragon heart spelled them away. Her wand then tumbled to the floor. In the back of his mind he heard it fall, just like he heard her whispered encouragement and heavy breaths. He knew he was supposed to be saying something. Instead he kissed her nose, then her cheek, then her chin, before he found her mouth again, their laughter mingling together as hands roamed, and more skin met its counterpart. His mind was in chaos. He couldn't seem to think at all, let alone make any coordinated plan. All the time he had wasted thinking over the last week was not even a memory. She rolled him onto his back and peppered his chest with kisses. Hands roamed wherever she willed them, and Harry closed his eyes and saw everything, green and purple, and most of all her violacious. Her hue like a warm blanket draped across him, but better because she was touching him with every part of herself. And there was nothing between them at all but such bright light he could barely lay still and let her love him. She moaned, and Harry couldn't stand it any longer. He reached for her and his hands met her hair, strands of silky tangled light that wove between his fingers as he pulled her down and rolled them over. He panted into the skin of her neck and paused for a moment, trying to make sense of everything, the smell of sweat and Hermione scrambling every rational thought in his brain. Spell. He managed the one word on a groan, Aunt Petunia's strident, high-pitched voice throwing enough cold water on his libido for a second's pause. She arched under him with a growled, impatient answer. Yes, he laughed one last time, and she nipped the skin of his own neck with blunt teeth, turning the sound to a low groan. Then there was nothing but blue-violet light and warm, wet skin, and Harry could only say her name over and over again as her hands pulled him closer and her nails bit sharply into his back. Violacious. He held her close to him, her front curled into his side, though his skin was cool now and the warmth of before was fading to a sticky, uncomfortable mess. I love you, he whispered to her as her hands traced idle patterns on his chest. She didn't pause, fingers swirling softly down over his stomach and back up to his throat. I love you too. Hermione's voice was a soft, contemplative murmur, and she turned her face to press a small kiss to his chest that turned into an idle nuzzle, her hair tickling his arm. Harry tightened his hold on her, loving the feeling of her in his arms, loving how comfortable he felt with her, not in the least uneasy about what they had done, nor what they had just said. I can't believe we haven't said that before, Hermione whispered, and Harry laughed, the motion of his chest shaking them both. Me either. I think I've said it to myself a dozen times. Hermione ran her nails across his stomach again, and Harry shivered for an entirely different reason. Me too, she murmured, then he felt her grin against his skin as she pressed closer. We need a shower, yours big enough for two. Until that moment, Harry hadn't considered cleanup. Now, he remembered that Hermione had admitted to reading romance novels, and both of them in the shower sounded like heaven in more than one way and suited far more than one purpose. Harry gathered her up in his arms, ignoring her muffled shrieks, and with a little helpful wandless magic leapt from the bed and began trotting towards the bathroom. Hermione always had the best ideas. The next time they saw Dudley, the boy tried to subvertly give Harry the thumbs up. The subtle effort was lost on him, but Hermione saw the gesture without a problem. She narrowed her eyes until her boyfriend's large cousin paled. Then she smiled brightly and cast him a wink. She wasn't above a little teasing when the situation warranted it, and really, she might just owe him a favor after all. Harry had been, without a doubt, spectacular. Neville was surprised when his Gran told him the headmaster of Hogwarts was in his sitting room. He was even more surprised when his mentor asked for the old invisibility cloak that had been gifted to him back in his first year at Hogwarts by an unknown benefactor. But when he learned just whom the cloak belonged to from a very reluctant headmaster, he was not just surprised, he was furious. "You gave me." He banged one fist against his chest. "A Potter heirloom. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." Gran barked in dismay, but Neville barely heard her over his fury as he continued. "The blind sorcerer's father's invisibility cloak. Does he know I have it?" At that thought, Neville paled. The papers had been full of the teenager's reported slaying of hundreds of Inferi, not to mention the remaining wanted Death Eaters. And Neville, since the tournament, had felt he owed the blind boy a debt for taking the cup from him. He doubted he would have fared as well against Voldemort and Peter Pettigrew. And he had never had the chance or the courage to tell Harry Potter so. The headmaster gravely shook his head, eyes darting towards where his Gran sat, her face reddening with anger. "No, my boy, of course not. When I gave it to you, I never thought Mr. Potter would be able to enter the wizarding world. He had no need of the cloak. It wasn't yours to decide that." Neville spat, and to his surprise and shame, realized that the respect he had always held for the venerable wizard was dissipating like dew in the sunlight. I can't even think. You know better." Mrs. Longbottom spat over top of his halting words. "Heirlooms are sacred to the old families. Giving one away to one outside a blood relation, it's just not done." Dumbledore raised his hand in a gesture for peace. "I was to give the cloak to Mr. Potter when he entered Hogwarts or came of age. Your grandson is not at fault for the misunderstanding I had, and now I am seeking to rectify my mistake." Neville straightened. Part of him wanted to simply go along, give the headmaster the cloak without further question. Another part, the Gryffindor part, was still angry. "Why didn't you tell me during the tournament? I could have returned it to him personally if I knew. Why now?" His Gran harumphed in agreement, fixing narrowed eyes at the venerable wizard. The headmaster only looked sad, his blue eyes not holding their usual twinkle. "Things were complicated, Mr. Longbottom. Such a small thing hardly took precedence over the events of the tournament and my other duties. It is enough to fix this now." There was a hint of steel in his voice, a subtle warning. Neville turned slightly away, but nodded once. "Fine, I'll get it to you." And he left the room with heavy steps, hearing his grandmother berating the headmaster behind him as he ascended the stairs to his bedroom. Neville gathered the cloak in his hands, feeling a strong wave of loss at losing the source of so many nighttime adventures. At least Ron and the twins still had the map. His hand on the doorknob, Neville paused at that thought. The Marauders map, which they had learned nearly 4 years ago, was created by James Potter, Remus Lupin, and Sirius Black. If it belonged to anyone, it was Harry Potter. How was keeping the map any different than what Dumbledore had done? At the time, Ron and Neville had assumed Potter would never need it, as he wasn't at Hogwarts. Later, the fact that he was blind and couldn't read or write had stalled their hand, along with a great feeling of loss for such a valuable tool around Hogwarts. Excuses to make them feel better about essentially commandeering another person's property. Neville gripped the silken surface of the cloak and raised his chin, coming to a sudden decision. He would write Ron and explain. The twins had graduated already, and they would too in only a year. It was time to return the map to whom it really belonged, whether the teenager could use it or not. It was the right thing to do. Harry sat at his desk, the odd ring in front of him, the clock across the room idly ticking the seconds as they passed. Grimmauld Place was silent. Hermione was shopping with her mother and aunt in London, something Harry had absolutely no interest in if it did not involve Diagon Alley. The ring's non-light glimmered, or more appropriately, the stone's unique pattern glimmered. He had tried on the ring several times, and found nothing interesting in the metal band itself. Simple gold, though so pure it was nearly too soft to wear, easily bent and twisted if not for old and fraying unbreakable charms. The stone was of no known origin or composition, harder than a diamond, for no diamond would scratch its surface. Hermione said it was black, and yet no reflection was cast on its smooth sides. To Harry it was black and white both, impassable, and nearly impossible to resist. He ran a finger over it, idly flipping it in his hand, turning it over and watching the pattern spin and topple. Hermione had said he reminded her disturbingly of Gollum from Tolkien's fantasy books. He had replied that there was indeed something precious about finding a pattern that shouldn't exist in his world. Alien, it did not belong, did not fit. And yet Voldemort had had it on his right middle finger, as Harry now wore it on his own. And perhaps the most marvelous thing of all, the stone refused to be changed. The only pattern he had ever encountered that could not be remade into another's shape and color. He couldn't make it emerald or diamond, no more than he could make it air or water or any known element. He had tried them each in turn. It refused to be anything other than a black-white stone, though the ring's metal itself was vulnerable enough to change. And no matter what he tried, he could not recreate the unique pattern from any other substance. It defied the very facts he thought he now knew about his vision and the world around him. The stone could not be changed. So what then did it do? What was its purpose? A swirl of yellow startled him briefly from his renewed inspection of the stone. He slipped it back on his hand with a frown as Creature's light barbed in a quick bow, fluttering pale blue color held in its hue. "Mr. Potter, sir. An owl." Harry looked at the small owl, and what he now saw was a carefully wrapped package tied to its claws, a charm upon it to only be removed by the intended recipient. "Bring it here." Creature released the owl in a thunder of ruffled feathers and raucous hoots, the dignity of the bird obviously offended by the handling. It landed on the library table in front of him, holding out one imperious foot. Up close, he could see more of the gold and red tints of protection charms. Whatever was inside was valuable. Harry dutifully untied the knots and pulled the package free, solid tan light under the charms. On top of the package was a letter that slowly unraveled itself, the envelope unfolding like ornate origami into a macabre mouth, paper edges like sharp teeth in a vicious grin, the more polite version of a howler, a letter that spoke in its enchanter's voice. "Mr. Potter, I hope this letter finds you well after the unfortunate events of 2 months ago. As your 17th year approaches, it is time to give you an heirloom of your father's, one left in my keeping before his death. A birthday present from your parents, if you will, and the hope that you and I can perhaps be acquaintances, if not friends, in the future. It is an invisibility cloak, and one that's make is far superior to any cloak that has ever been made before or since. I made it my study for many years with your father's permission, and its mysteries still remain unsolved. Treasure it, and know that your father and his friends brought about great mischief in the halls of Hogwarts with its use. Albus Dumbledore." His father's invisibility cloak. Harry frowned as the letter unfolded itself and fluttered down to the table, limp, the blue spell that animated it dissolved like water with its purpose finished. "Give the owl a treat. Send back a standard acknowledgement of receipt." Harry absently told Creature, beginning to untie the straps holding the thick brown wrapping made of mundane animal hide that would repel the worst of any rain the owl might have traveled through. He had read of invisibility cloaks and seen more than one in Madame Malkin's. They usually had finite use, some lasting mere years before their demiguise hair faded and became visible. Others would only last days, regular cloaks instead, heavily enchanted with disillusionment charms. But one that lasted decades. No wonder the headmaster had wanted to test it. He could almost forgive the man for waiting so long to return it to him. If his own father had indeed used it at Hogwarts, he very much doubted the wizard was supposed to wait until he was nearly out of Hogwarts to use it. Harry paused abruptly as the brown light fell away. His breath sucked sharply between his teeth. Before him, folded in upon itself, was black darkness and white light, geometric cones morphing into triangular prisms, the pattern that should not be possible. He reached for it, his hands falling into soft fabric, running fingers over the cloak with slitted eyes, unable to look and cover its pattern with his own green light, too startled by its existence. On his finger the stone pulsed sharply, a rhythm echoed immediately by the cloak, two sentient items recognizing in the other a brother. Not exactly the same. A part of his mind catalogued that the ring was more prism and the cloak more cone, but that color. Harry gathered the black white to him, its long length tumbling down his legs as it unfolded, its texture like silk, yet rough with some sewn pattern he couldn't see. Magic, fueled by something other, a source all its own working some magic he could not comprehend. He jumped to his feet, pushing back his chair with a sharp noise, and flung the pattern around his shoulders. He felt it grow longer of its own accord, adjusting to his height, extra material gathering at his neck in the form of a hood. He tossed it over his head, and it fell down over his face, and suddenly he saw nothing but darkness and light. It was as if he stood among the stars, lost in space, no room around him, only a circle of green wood under his feet left to hold him to reality. The darkness reached out into infinity, white lights growing and dissipating inside of it, and he could not see where the light began and the darkness ended, where one melded into the other, endless angles and shapes surrounding him. Harry simply stood there and breathed it in, his heart pounding, the fabric touching his face and neck and arms and hands and bare feet, and though it made no common sense he felt as if the pattern was reaching past his skin to his own magic, pressing it into a new shape, claiming it as its own. Master! He heard Creature's muffled voice, his tentative footsteps as he trod across the room and among the shelves. Harry could not see the yellow of him, only heard the house elf grumble in confusion and leave the room with the soft pop of elf magic. Harry slowly began to smile, giddy excitement flooding through him in waves. Hermione was going to love this. I want to see it the way you do. Hermione groused, staring down at the folded cloak in her lap. To her, it was a shimmering silver color with shining swirls that all faded into invisibility as the cloak was closed around something. Really, she didn't understand what the big deal was about it, or the stone, nor why Harry was so fascinated by them. So much so that he had barely worked on anything else, spending the last 3 days of his time testing the cloak's invisibility and any link it had to have with the stone in the ring. Though he hadn't complained about taking time away to spend it with her, alone. She smiled at that thought and spoke. And I have an idea, she said, and was pleased when Harry's black head jerked up, green eyes fixing on her immediately from where they had been locked on the ring. Pensives. He blinked, then blinked again. I can't believe I haven't thought of that. They're typically used to sort one's own thoughts and memories, but they can be viewed by others if not guarded. Exactly, Hermione affirmed before she frowned. Though I've read they are viewed in the third person, not as the actual person who made the memory. So there is a chance it might not show things how you see them. But I might be able to use one to see you. Harry breathed, and she felt herself flushing at his tone. And colors and forms as others do. You could place memories of color charts for me. I can truly be able to confirm the names of the colors I see as more than extrapolations and guesses based on their shades. I've always wondered exactly what exact shade of brown your hair is. Hermione reached to tug a lock of her hair in response, then wrinkled her nose at the reaction. It's far more useful than just finding out what color my hair is, Harry. We could both view memories of experiments from both points of view, maybe catch something the other missed. Where can we get one? Harry frowned. They are rare, mostly because they are expensive to create, but also because many are destroyed when their owners die, along with any memories still trapped within them. It's a wizarding tradition that doesn't make much fiscal sense, and if I'm not mistaken, each is also registered with the ministry. I can check my vaults. If I'm lucky, the Blacks or Potters have one already. If not, some shop in Diagon Alley must know where I can buy one. Hermione bounced in her seat at the thought of it being that easy to solve an aggravation that had plagued her for years. To truly be able to understand what Harry sees. To view souls as towering spheres of light, everything in the world having a pattern and hue. She had often dreamed of how that must be. Harry stepped closer, reaching down to pull the cloak into his arms, cradling it as if the bundle was fragile, his look of awe as he gazed at it, making her wish all the more that she could understand. Let's go tomorrow, she blurted out, and Harry's gaze jumped up to her. He smiled at her left ear with a fond grin, and she shifted slightly with practiced ease so that he was meeting her eyes instead. Please, he laughed, and placed the cloak aside before pulling her into a quick embrace. I insist on it. I wish we could go right now. She raised up on her toes to gently touch his lips with hers before turning in his arms and stepping away. Good. I better get going. My mum will be here any minute to pick me up. She saw him frown and found herself smiling. He always lost track of time. Even though the clock was enchanted to read it aloud every hour and on command, he never seemed to bother and never noticed the shadows moving across the floor and the sun setting through the window. His world was never dark, and she couldn't wait to see it for herself. Harry walked through the mass of ward lights into the leaky cauldron, the invisibility cloak pinned around his shoulders underneath his normal brown wizarding robes. Hermione had thought him odd for insisting on bringing it, but even as he felt the ring belonged on his finger, he felt his father's cloak should be around his neck. It did not make him invisible when worn in this way. After testing, the invisibility only triggered when it covered at least 75% of his body, more than three-fourths of his physical form. But when he looked down at himself, he saw the dark light of its pattern and felt oddly at ease, as if the potential to escape into its unique pattern was better than any golden ward or defensive rune. And when he had hesitantly tested its vulnerability to curses that might harm or tear the fabric, he had found it to be indeed as strong as any magical barrier. Its pattern, just like the stone, could not be tainted. It could not be pierced or changed or destroyed. That fact alone was enough to wear it on his back. They're staring at you, Hermione murmured at his side as they crossed the room. The normal din of the pub had faded to silence as they passed, no utensils scraping plates, no idle chatter. He heard the pop of a wizarding camera and wondered if Hermione blinked at the flash. I know, he murmured back, lips barely moving as he kept striding forward, not pausing as he heard whispers around him. His name, his new title, his supposed magical power. Rumors and facts sprinkled liberally together like salt and pepper on a dish. Ignore them. Trying. Hermione hissed, and he heard her breath a sigh of relief when they exited to the entrance of the alley and its temporary privacy. Perhaps you should simply wear that cloak after all and pass to Gringotts without anyone recognizing you. Harry only shook his head. That thought had come and gone already. I can't. No more than I can wear a glamour over my face. I'll be as blind as I am in a bubblehead charm, seeing only the magic inside it. She shifted, idly moving her wand from one hand to the next as she thought. We could change your hair then, or you could wear fabric over your eyes like you did the first time you came with your aunt. Harry grimaced at the reminder. That was before people were on the lookout for a blind wizard in their midst. Anything over my eyes and they'll notice, just as much as they would notice the scars across my face, even if my hair was a different color. I'd also have to ditch my staff, which the paper has covered in detail now. I'm single-handedly responsible for the 20% increase in staff sales at Ollivander's in the last year. Color moved behind them, a deep pink shade that faltered and then backed away into the building as quickly as it had exited. Hermione groaned. It's useless. We'll just need to push through. Exactly as we agreed, Harry said, and held out his left hand for her to take. Her light jerked in what might have been a nervous nod. Harry squeezed her hand and faced the bricks as she tapped them in the entrance pattern. Time to see if a few months had settled down any of the furor around him. Hermione glared furiously at the witch as they left Gringotts. The nerve. The woman had actually jerked her two children away from them like they were piranhas. And unfortunately, it wasn't the first time it had happened during the hour they had been in the alley. She had been worried about being bombarded with papers for Harry to autograph, a slightly embarrassing prospect, as Harry could hardly write. She had been worried about people asking to shake his hand, or asking for an interview, or just waiting them to chatter on about one thing or another. She hadn't expected the silence that followed them, the eyes that refused to look at them, the witches and wizards who fled their presence like they were fiends, or hid their loved ones as if Harry would gobble them up for an early supper. Harry wasn't the boy who lived any longer, a savior figure who could do no wrong, a symbol of light. He was the blind sorcerer, someone to be feared, someone who may be able to strike them dead with a glance. That the papers had implied only evil beings needed to fear him had hardly soothed the doubt that he might be capable of it anyway. The witch, seeing her glare, went deathly pale, raising one hand in some plea. Harry tugged her away with his hand in hers. She glanced over at him, saw the lines of tension on his face. He might not be able to see the expressions of those around him, but he was hardly deaf to the sudden silence, and surely noticed when people moved away from them to make an easy path, something she was not accustomed to in previous trips to the crowded alley. It was the largest wizarding shopping center in all of Britain. Never before had she walked through it and not bumped shoulders with somebody or had her foot stepped on by accident. And Gringotts hadn't even had a pensive after all, both vaults containing multiple other fascinating objects, but not a single round bowl among them. Can you just owl the shops to ask after pensives? Harry's sudden question jolted her out of her angry thoughts. She blinked in surprise. I guess so. Don't you at least want to stop here? She pointed only 100 feet away, where Wiseacre's Wizarding Equipment's bright sign broadcasted its many wares. It was a general store for every wizard, and while they might not have an actual pensive, they could surely point them in the right direction. Harry shook his head once, wild black hair falling over his face and nearly hiding the scars around his eyes. I'd rather go. Even his voice was strained now. Hermione suddenly wished dearly that she could apparate them both from the street. It's him. A child's voice whispered nearby in excitement, echoed by others. Who? Girl said loudly, and was hushed with a rapid response. You know who? Hermione stopped and turned with horror rising in her chest. The boy and girl were staring up at Harry with worshipful eyes, having no idea what they had just implied. You know who? A common euphemism for a dark lord whose name was so feared it wasn't even spoken years after he terrorized Britain. And if anyone said you know who, the other person knew who you were talking about in an instant. There was no one else you could possibly mean. Until maybe, now. Harry slowly turned beside her, no doubt having heard the same thing, but moving as if time had slowed down for him, taking in and cataloguing every pattern and color he saw. Hermione felt the flare of energy before she could think to stop him, and tried not to wince when she saw his eyes begin to gleam as he looked at the girl. Thank Merlin it was daytime, or the entire street would no doubt erupt in dramatic screams. Lucky for them, it was also only the gathered children who were close enough to see. Some of them went still with sudden fear, others only fidgeted in excitement at the attention from their hero. Harry's hand moved, and Hermione saw the glint of the black stone on his finger as he raised it towards them. Far away, Hermione heard someone shout a warning. Then in his palm, the air began to twist and turn, a new shape taking form, long metal stems with fragile-looking clear blooms that glittered in the sunlight. She knew that look very well from their various experiments. Diamond, Harry's favorite gemstone pattern. Harry knelt and gestured the girl forward, who took tentative steps towards them, her eyes wide on the sudden appearance of flowers in his hand. Take one, all of you, Harry said softly, and the girl's mouth split into a wide grin. She skipped forward, and the other children came with her like dogs on a leash, eyes eager at the sudden bounty. Each got one. Harry had made just enough for each child. They thanked him fervently as he stood, and she saw that the smile on his face was genuine this time. None of them were afraid now, though the adults on the street maintained their cautious distance. As they walked away from their new pack of fans, Harry headed towards Wiseacre's instead of the leaky cauldron. Hermione slid her hand back into his, and he cast her another small smile. Will you give them all diamonds and gold to win them over? Hermione questioned softly, injecting some humor into her voice through pure force of will. Harry paused at the door, looking down at her, and his green eyes were normal and human. No, I'll give them better than that if they would only forget I exist. Why did you do it then? 'Cause they and their parents certainly won't forget when those flowers don't disappear in a few days, she asked, and Harry shook the hair from his face before looking at the staff in his hand. Because I could, and because they're just kids repeating what their parents have been telling each other and reading from the papers. They don't understand, and yet they treat me more normally than any of the adults we have passed. Better that I give them some fact with their fiction. Normally, Hermione demanded. That girl called you know who. One side of his mouth lifted in a grin. I thought that was kind of funny myself. Plus, it wasn't used as a title, just a reference. Hermione sniffed, but reached for the door handle to pull it open. Under her breath, she muttered her response. I'm sure that Monster's title started as just a reference, too. Harry waved to Hermione as she was driven away, Mrs. Granger's bright pattern seated behind the wheel. Automobiles, odd contraptions of bright metal and shadowy composites, hovering off the ground on rubber tires he couldn't see. They had scared him when he was little, until he began to understand more about how they worked and the way they were built. Like the Muggle version of magic carpets, he thought absently before he turned to re-enter Grimmauld Place. Perfected over years of experimentation, taking 3 to 6 months to manufacture and assemble parts together, and usually only lasting for several years before their decay made them unusable. Still, automobiles were far superior to magic carpets. Their potential alone was greater. There was a reason the night bus utilized Muggle technology to some extent, stealing the shell of a bus and enchanting it to run on magic, capable of feats no normal automobile could handle, nearly indestructible if its wards were maintained. He could spend a year of his time alone, finding a way to convert more Muggle automobiles to run on magic in such a way that the Muggles would never know it was magic at all. A synthetic fuel, perhaps. Create, enforced, steel that was in truth enchanted to be 10 times stronger than modern components. Safer, cleaner. Harry strode to his and Hermione's notes in his office, speaking to the self-writing quill as he laid out his newest idea before setting it aside. Not yet. Automobiles would be a much harder market to enter, unique materials or not. They had to start smaller, grow their reputation first, make connections in the business world. There were a million possibilities they could explore. Harry sat, pulling the invisibility cloak from off his shoulders to hold it in his lap as he thought over the transaction at Wiseacre's. No pensives were simply sitting around for sale on a shelf. They were too rare, too expensive, and not in great demand for the previous two reasons. Most families who could afford them already had one. Unfortunately, the last Blacks had been entombed with Walburga Black, and the Potters hadn't had one in generations. But he could order one to be custom-made for himself, which is exactly what he had done at Wiseacre's. Hermione had been more specific than he. He hadn't really cared what the thing looked like, only that it worked. Hermione, however, seemed to take great delight looking through the options, so he told her to get whatever she wanted. It was for her, too, after all. Only another month or two, and he would be able to see her. He still had his doubts about her seeing his own sight, but if the memory was viewed from the outside, surely he could see her. It bothered him that others could see a part of her that he could not. If there was any possible way to change that, even temporarily, he would try it. Leaning back in his chair, Harry closed his eyes, absently spreading the cloak over his face, mentally falling into the dark light as it surrounded him. A peaceful retreat he was beginning to rely on from the constant brightness of color and light around him. My own version of closing the blinds against the sun, Harry thought absently and smiled against the fabric. The first time Creature saw his master's legs separated from his invisible body, he panicked. One too many splinching incidents from young black suns coming foremost to his mind. The second time, his heart leapt in sudden fear when he came upon the floating head of Master Potter as he walked down the hallway, his body occasionally becoming visible as the cloak he wore moved with each step. The third time, he only grumbled in disgust. Every time after, when only small portions of his master's anatomy were in sight, shoes absently hanging out over a sofa cushion, a hand stretched out of thin air to grab a quill or piece of parchment, he only spared a moment's thought at the oddity of it all. But he did insist, vehemently, that no black ate at the dining table invisible, splinched, or otherwise missing some part of himself that was not lost in a worthy duel, and his master agreed with a look and a smile. I hate them. I hate them all. Hermione said the sentence simply, an incontrovertible statement of fact. I wish they were never born. Harry, leaning against a brick wall outside the house elf registry, only nodded once in agreement. He hadn't been much help with the contracts, but listening to Hermione's increased agitation had put him on edge nearly as much as the complete silence in the building, as witches and wizards listened avidly for any word he might speak. So out of pure stubbornness he had remained silent unless Hermione asked him a question directly, which she hadn't, not even once. She was too furious, and she knew him too well. If she asked, he might have just turned the elderly wizard who called his house elves items of property into a toad. A true, fly-eating toad down to the last amphibian pattern detail. It's slavery. I don't care if house elves need a house or a family or whatnot to keep their magic. They were all so patronizing, as if witches and wizards were doing the elves a favor by putting them into slavery. No wages, no benefits, no vacation time, no clothing but disgusting used pillowcases. It's demeaning, and the house elves are too blind and uneducated to see it. If they were just treated properly, I could make them understand and stand up for themselves. This can't continue. Her voice was firm. Harry watched colors pass them by, mostly oblivious to their presence in the slightly darkened alcove where the registry was located. He sighed. What are you going to do? It was obvious to anyone who knew her that Hermione wouldn't just let something like this slide. Hermione's light paced back and forth in short strides in front of him before she came to a stop, one hand wrapping about his own hand that held his staff. I'm going to convince a member of the Wisengamot to make a statement supporting the rights of house elves. Harry looked at her and saw the determination in the tilt of her chin, her mouth downturned in a solemn frown. He didn't have to ask who she was going to convince first. I'm not an official member yet. She lifted one shoulder. You have 2 empty seats that no one is sitting in. I've read up on the rules. You only have to show up whenever you like at any meeting you choose. It's an outdated custom I don't agree with. I much prefer a proper representative democracy, but I'm willing to use it for the benefit of those who can't help themselves. Harry smiled slightly. House elves don't want to be helped. Hermione scoffed. House elves don't know they need to be helped. So I'm not going to begin to advocate that we help them outright. Only that all contracts binding lesser creatures be humane and offer solid scientific reasons why. Ourselves are sentient beings, and just because they need to clean and serve does not mean they need to do so in poverty. Harry stood upright, more than ready to leave. So we're not getting a house elf right now. Hermione stamped one impatient foot. Not until we get rid of this ancient ministry standard, and the contracts are written with a time limit, not for life, and can include basic amenities like a wage and proper clothing, and an exit clause, and the option to take vacation time. And Harry stopped her increasing tirade with a quick kiss, smiling. You don't ask for much, do you? She sniffed, but wrapped her arm through his. I only ask what's reasonable. Harry began to walk them both back towards the main thoroughfare of Diagon Alley. And you have 3 months before the next quarterly meeting in September to find a way to convince the Wisengamot what's reasonable. Don't expect them to vote on it, though. Proposals are usually made at one meeting and discussed and lobbied in the interim before being voted the following quarter. Hermione's voice was a low grumble in response. I'm not a politician. Your political weight is the only influence we have. Viola hasn't released a paper in over a year, and starting now might seem a little suspect, especially if you are the one to back it. I'm not sure I'm ready to be known as the Viola in Viola, James, and it wouldn't take a genius to put 2 and 2 together and make 4. Harry observed the patterns stalling, drifting, and at times jerking out of their way. He didn't bother frowning. He had made that mistake on the walk-in, and 2 young witches had shrieked, while another witch scolded them loudly for being ninnies. From then on, he maintained a pleasant, calm facade, and also considered never coming to Diagon Alley again and becoming a hermit. My political weight is not insignificant, based on the continuing reactions of others. Harry glanced at Hermione's light beside his own, feeling as if he was walking under an ocean of multicolored light, yet surrounded by a bubble of empty space. I advocate for it now. It's likely we'll have people stumbling from the woodwork to get on my good side, while the opposition chews their nails to the quick at the thought of raising my ire. I suppose fame is good for something then. Hermione mumbled, voice low, if it can prevent a race from being enslaved. Harry leaned slightly into her, drawing her closer until their shoulders brushed with each step. There's my optimist. I knew she would find the bright side of the general populace fearing the sight of me. She laughed. It's also nice to not get my feet stomped on, and I'm vastly relieved no one has yet asked us to pose for pictures. Harry grinned. Give it time. Master Potter. Harry opened his eyes to the dark light of the cloak, draped over his body like a warm blanket, his house elf's testy voice in his ear. Master, creature knows master is under there. You has a visitor, sir. At that, Harry groaned. He had been up so late it was morning when he fell asleep, trying to work on his own hypothesis of integrating magic into general relativity. But attempting to put something as flexible as magic into a mathematical equation was a task that would not be solved in a night, a month, or even a year. But every hour still counted. Master! Creature's bony hands fiddled with the cloak, and Harry groaned again when it was flung off of him. He winced at the sudden influx of light, the bright neon yellow of his house elf competing with hues of green and brown and purple and red. It's not a school day. He mumbled and turned over, though pressing his face into the pillow only filled his mind with the green color of cot. Creature knows this very well, Master. Your mundane college term has not yet began. Master has a visitor. The house elf refused to acknowledge that his master went to a muggle school. Muggles, he said, were idiotic people easily fooled, the exact opposite of anything worthy of his Lord Black. He had settled for the term mundane. Hermione had found that both amusing at first and sadly valid later once she researched the derogatory origin of the word and vowed to renounce the term muggle as well. Wait, visitor. Harry turned back over and sat up, the dark light pooling at his waist as he fixed his eyes on Creature. Hermione's here. Had he slept past noon? She wasn't coming over until 3:30 in the afternoon to discuss their paper on house elves. No, Master. Your visitor is Albus Dumbledore, the former headmaster of Hogwarts. A fact the Dower House elf apparently had found greatly amusing after reading in the Daily Prophet that the wizard was stepping down. Though now essentially working for a light family, the elf still held a great dislike for Dumbledore and any of his Phoenix Order. It seemed that one had managed to wound Regulus Black quite severely at one point during the war. Here, Harry swung his legs over and stared dully down at his green feet, the light within swirling with each beat of his heart, each admittedly slow beat. He was exhausted. Obviously. Creature sneered. Should I offer him tea while he waits? That the wizard would have to wait was a given. Making Creature serve him tea, however, would probably turn the elf against him for a solid week. The last time he had pissed off the elf, he had had to swallow down cold soup for 3 days, and had to sidestep furniture that had suddenly decided to relocate itself about a foot to the right from its normal designation. The furniture moving had been worse than the horrible soup. He hated having his things moved out of place. No, that's all right. Harry grumbled and blearily rose to his feet. I'll be down in a few minutes. He pulled on fresh clothing and began to loop the invisibility cloak over one shoulder. As he did, a thought occurred to him. Maybe Dumbledore wanted the cloak back, over my dead body. On second thought, Harry folded the garment and placed it inside his drawer, rapidly weaving the pattern of a ward over top of it for good measure. Then he turned to find out just what the former headmaster was after. The wizard's pattern was as solid as ever, pale blue light, powerful and strong. The scarlet flecks of his Phoenix Familiar scattered across his chest like accidental paint splattered against a wall. The red and blue really did not mix well in his opinion, and if he was anything at all, it was a good judge of color. Mr. Potter. The man rose from where he had been sitting in Grimmauld Place's large, formal sitting room. Sorry to drop on you without owling first. The polite thing to say would be, don't worry about it. But he was tired and heading straight towards a foul mood because of it. I'm sure you'll remember next time. Was his voice normally that cold? It sounded chilly even to his own ears. Behind him, he heard Creature let out a pleased gasp. Dumbledore, however, was made of sterner stuff. Indeed, I will. I've come to ask a favor of you if you would be so kind as to oblige me. Harry frowned. What could he possibly do for Albus Dumbledore? He walked towards the chair opposite of the older wizard, taking the time to kick his fuzzy mind into gear. How much of a coincidence was it that his cloak was returned to him from this man only a bare few weeks before he asked for a favor? Or had it nearly been a month now? He had turned 17 the week before and received official notification that he was eligible to take both of his seats on the Wisengamot. He was now Lord Potterblack, whether he wished it or not. He was eligible to learn to apparate if he was able to properly visualize a destination, which he was not yet. He had thoughts on solving that conundrum. For instance, the distinctive patterns of Hogwarts that he had memorized so well should make enough of a target for him if he was not afraid of risking splinching. And yet, splinching developed from the wizard not properly visualizing himself, not exactly his target. Harry knew his own pattern inside and out. he doubted he would splinch. But the ministry teachers had not been so easily persuaded of that fact, if too fearful to outright deny him. When he had went with Hermione to her own classes, their patterns had fluctuated radically whenever he happened to look at them. He could tell they wouldn't dare turn him away if he returned determined to get a license. A favor, Harry finally echoed as he sat, the blue light copying his motion. Yes, my boy. During my time as headmaster, I've been searching for artifacts of the Hogwarts founders to add to the collection within the school. As this was my last year, I thought it good luck when my research led me to the Black Name. It appears that a valuable trinket might have been hidden within the Black Vault, or even in this very house. With your permission, of course, I would like to see if it is indeed here, and if so, I would be willing to offer you a substantial reimbursement to add it to the Hogwarts collection. Harry's mind abruptly cleared from its tired fog at that thought. He had been through both the vault and Grimmauld Place with a fine tooth comb. Even the attic had been conquered in the last year, each fascinating object catalogued and either sold or placed in specific cabinets if found useful or interesting. If there had been anything of the founders, but then again, he hadn't focused much attention on the founders themselves during his stay at the school, preferring to study the castle instead. He probably wouldn't recognize any object of theirs. What does it look like? Harry asked, and saw the blue light shift and pulse. Dumbledore was uncomfortable. Ah, the wizard made a sound in his throat. Well, it's a relatively small locket on a chain, silver in color, with a stylized letter S embossed on one side, usually called Slytherin's locket. Harry froze. It couldn't be. And yet it had to be. The same locket that Creature wore around his neck at that very moment. Hermione had said it was silver. The question was, did Dumbledore know that the locket had once held a fragment of Voldemort? Had he truly come looking for a valuable artifact, or was he hunting down a soul? And if it was the latter, did that mean he finally had access to someone who knew more about soul patterns than the average person? The thought made his heart race with excitement. I know what you are referring to, Harry said, keeping his voice soft with effort. But I'm afraid it's not mine to give. It belongs to my house elf. He heard the wizard gasp, saw his lights pound with the brightness of either surprise or exultation, perhaps both. Creature, Harry called, but the elf was already stomping across the floor from the doorway he had been eavesdropping in. Master gave it to Creature its creatures. The yellow light demanded hotly. Dumbledore sputtered in surprise. That is, I can pay. No, Creature spat. Creatures. Dumbledore fidgeted in his chair. Can I just see it then? Confirm its authenticity? Before Creature could do more than stomp one small foot, Harry interceded. Let him see it. You've already said you won't sell the thing, and this way he has no reason to come back. As long as he doesn't try to steal it. Sneaky wizard. The house elf mumbled very audibly under his breath, before fumbling for the bright pinpricks of metal about his neck, pulling it off to reluctantly place it in Dumbledore's glowing blue hands. The wizard flipped it over in his hands, swinging the clasp open and closed. Minutes passed slowly even as the blue light weakened before his eyes with disappointment. Dumbledore passed the locket back to Creature, who hastily swung the chain around his neck again, popping out of the room in the next breath before either wizard could change their minds. I'm afraid that locket must be a replica after all, Mr. Potter. It was said the original was cursed with dark magic before it came into black hands. Harry sat up straighter in his chair, eyes fixed on Dumbledore's tall pillar of light. What kind of curse? The wizard shifted. A very dark one, I'm afraid, and quite illegal. I've come across one other replica already, and suspect that one must be as well, in the hopes to mislead anyone searching for the cursed original. Even as Dumbledore made to rise, Harry looked at him, green light pressing blue into a human shape, old wrinkled skin, a long beard, smooth velvet robes. Harry focused on the man's face as he made his statement. There was a curse on the locket when I found it. The former headmaster had stilled halfway from his chair at Harry's words. The old man's eyes locked on his own. I removed the dark magic off it before giving it to Creature as a memento from his former master, Regulus Black. Dumbledore sat, his face betraying shock, and Harry let his look fade away as he leaned back in his chair. It was answer enough. There was much more to this locket than a simple artifact for the Hogwarts collection. That should not be possible, Mr. Potter. The particular curse that possessed it could only be destroyed with the destruction of the object. This is how I know that your elf's locket cannot be the correct one. It makes me wonder, though, why such a thing would be a keepsake of Mr. Black. Harry lifted a shoulder. Because Regulus could not remove the curse himself before he died, and Creature could not remove the curse or destroy the locket either, though he tried very hard to do both. It seems Regulus thought the locket was something very important of Voldemort's and needed to be eradicated. When I was informed of this, I was happy to do him a service. Harry heard the man suck in a breath, his blue lights pulsing with growing power as it unconsciously rose in response to the wizard's unease. How did you remove the curse? Harry narrowed his eyes in response. What kind of curse did you think was on it? He had to know if Dumbledore knew it was a soul fragment, and if so, how Voldemort had broken his own soul and separated the pieces on purpose. Maybe his own gift of soul manipulation was not as unique as he feared. Dumbledore shifted in his chair, hands of light folding calmly in his lap as he finally spoke. A form of immortality. A curse that enabled Tom Riddle to reincarnate himself if he had possession of it. Not quite enough, Harry thought. I've only heard of the Philosopher's Stone being able to create a form of eternal life, and it is not reincarnation. Everything I know points to the fact that once a person dies, their soul is irrevocably gone. Anything brought back to life at that point is an inferi or zombie, a dead husk. Ah! Dumbledore made a noise in his throat. Well, you see then the conundrum and how it must be solved. To prevent the soul from leaving this realm, Riddle did very dark, evil acts to tie his soul here. This locket was one such tie. Harry let out his breath, his eyes halfway closing as the other wizard continued. But by its nature, once this tie is made, the object cannot be retrieved whole. It must be destroyed. I confess, I was not going to donate this locket when I found it, but have it destroyed the only way I know how. Something that can kill even the soul of a witch or wizard. Fiendfire. Harry narrowed his eyes at that. His fiendfire had not destroyed the souls of the Death Eaters it consumed, though he could understand why wizards might think it could. That would also partly explain why it was considered such a dark spell. And all of this is why you could not possibly have destroyed it, Mr. Potter. That locket remains whole. No doubt there was another curse of some sort on it that you dispelled. If you are willing, I would search your house and vault for the true locket. Harry slowly shook his head, a smile growing on his face. That was the true locket. I saw the broken soul of Voldemort inside of it, just as I saw that same soul inside of the Voldemort and his snake when they attacked me in the graveyard, and again months ago in Surrey. All four were the same color and shade. Dumbledore trembled. The light of him rocked like a candle flame blown about in the wind. But I didn't wait a snake. The wizard's voice was frail, tired, one too many surprises in the span of an hour. Harry frowned. Yes, there was a snake in the graveyard. I was forced to kill it, as there was a great deal of protection charms on it, and capturing it seemed unnecessary. It seemed far more important to take Voldemort and Pettigrew back. I see. Dumbledore ran a hand over his face, blue light swirling, red sparks gleaming in solid counterpart. The man's heart beat faster than ever. I. You have no idea, Harry, how glad this makes me, if I can only make myself believe it. Harry shifted in his chair, confused and far more eager to change the subject back to just how Voldemort had managed to manipulate his soul. I don't understand, Harry said, and frowned more when Dumbledore chuckled. He hated it when older adults acted like they knew some grand secret he did not. I'm so unbelievably relieved, my boy. I always suspected there were 7 parts of Riddle's soul scattered about. I managed to track down 3 myself, an old diary, and 2 items attached to Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. The riddle of the graveyard and then Surrey accounted for 2 more, making 5. I sought the locket as the 6th, but I worried the 7th was, well, it doesn't matter any longer. A snake. To know my search is finally over. Tom Riddle laid to rest at last. Harry rather thought most of Tom Riddle wasn't resting at all. He had been very thorough in ripping what soul remained to shreds on 2 occasions. Harry leaned forward. But how did Voldemort do it? Manipulate his soul in such a way? Everything I've studied said soul magic hasn't been mastered since the time of the ancient Egyptians, and what texts on such magic remained was destroyed to prevent another Herpo the Foul utilizing it to horrible degrees. Dumbledore's voice was grave. or as grave as it could be in a wizard still high on success. And perhaps, because of that, the wizard was more willing to give information than normal. Dark wizards are always willing to do things good people are not. Many masters of the dark arts and the defense against them know that certain acts of purposeful violence can crack and break a soul, murder, torture, the like. When such is done, it is merely a matter of the proper rituals to contain the broken fragment of soul in the intended object. There are downsides, of course. The soul inside only possessed the knowledge up until it was broken, and does not have as much magical or mental strength as the original. To do such over and over again, 7 times, the Voldemorts you encountered were nowhere near as sane or at the strength as Tom Riddle in his prime. Fortunate enough for us. Harry blinked at that information. He knew well enough that souls could crack and break, and not merely the soul of the one doing the violence, but also the one who falls victim to it. But, but what kind of ritual? Did it allow the dark wizard to see his own soul in order to capture it? Was it some means of creating temporary mage sight? Dumbledore spoke, disapproval in his tone. You do not need to know such details in the creation of Horcruxes, Mr. Potter. The ritual did not allow sight, but was more of a summons to the broken piece of soul. I won't say more. He didn't have to. Harry wilted slightly in his chair. He had hoped for a few moments that he wasn't so unique after all. A ritual to recreate his own sight seemed plausible in his mind. And with his sight, every other advantage he had would also be gained, mainly the ability to permanently manipulate the patterns of an object or person. Dumbledore continued, probing. How did you remove the soul? I would like to know. I could have saved the diadem of Ravenclaw with that knowledge. It was priceless. Harry could care less. He gave a tired sigh, waving one hand in dismissal. I took the pattern of Voldemort and removed it from the locket's metal pattern. Then it was only a matter of killing the soul so it would not seek to possess anyone. While the fact that dark wizards might have been able to see and manipulate souls by killing people was disturbing, he would have preferred that fact than to continue to be a wizarding oddity. A superpowered sorcerer who could not only kill at a glance, but destroy another's soul, which was far worse than death. Killing the soul. Dumbledore's voice was idle in its curiosity. Harry looked down at the stone on his middle finger, the spark of dark light, a reassuring gleam of shadow. He might be able to kill a soul, but he still couldn't change whatever the ring was. Yes, Harry answered, twisting the metal against his skin, black-white on emerald green. I made its light fade. He had also shattered it, too many pieces to even return to what afterlife souls went to. Just like the Voldemort in Surrey had shattered on the pavement when he had torn it in two. There was a point when a soul was so broken it was not a soul any longer, but merely fragments of wasted power and dying light. It made him wonder what happened to the pieces of Voldemort that had returned. Where did all souls go and why? Fade. The note in Dumbledore's voice brought Harry out of his reverie. His head whipped up, seeing blue light still seated before him. He had nearly forgotten the man was there, lost in his own thoughts. Perhaps he shouldn't have been quite so frank. Hermione would thrash him if she was here. People are alive. I can see it. Harry said. That fact was nothing the man hadn't known already. I also know what someone looks like when they are dead. It's a simple matter to know how to change one to the other. I hadn't credited much the rumors that you had a look that could kill. The media tends to make such exaggerated statements when the fervor takes them. But you are saying it's true. Hermione was definitely going to kill him. Harry straightened, running one hand through his wild hair in frustration. It's not, but it was true. The papers don't, but the papers were far more right than even they suspected. I don't understand why that is so important. It's no different than any spell capable of killing, or muggle means for that matter. But it was important. A spell took time and knowledge and even practice to cast. A gun, at least time to pull the trigger. All required some sort of aim. If he wanted, need only look. All he needed was the will to stop a patterned light, and only himself, that he knew of, could harm the soul as well as the body. I understand, Mr. Potter, though I suggest you keep the knowledge of such an ability to yourself regardless. Many do not believe what is written in the Daily Prophet, thank Merlin. But if you acknowledged such an ability, the fear you are experiencing now from the public would be tenfold. Even the ministry might get involved, though I know not how. You are a celebrity and a lord twice over to boot. That gives you some protection at least. Still, better to avoid it. That's my plan. Harry returned. I have no desire to make it well known. Good, very good. The wizard let out a breath and slowly stood. This has been a most enlightening day. Thank you. Harry looked away from the blue light back down at the ring. Any time. And when Dumbledore finally left, Harry trudged up the stairs to his room and fell onto the bed, dismantling the warded drawer and summoning the glowing shadowed pattern within to him, settling the cloak back over his body with a flex of green power. And he tried to convince himself he wasn't hiding before he fell back into dreamless sleep. Done. His task of over 2 decades was done. There would be no more Dark Lord Voldemort. The prophecy was completed after all. Harry Potter, with the knowledge the Dark Lord knew not, had managed to destroy what Horcruxes remained. It was over. Albus looked over his old family home in Godric's Hollow, a smile growing on his wrinkled face. The Order of the Phoenix could be disbanded for the final time. No more searching, worrying, waiting, guessing. It was time for an old man to enjoy his retirement. Time for the world to get along without Albus Dumbledore holding the reins. Though, of course, he wasn't quite ready to retreat entirely. There was still some work a wizard his age could do. With a grin, Albus sank into his chair by the fire, one hand absently going to the long, slender wand on his forearm with a gentle touch. The pensive came a week before term was to start, at the end of August. The bowl gleamed with magic, spells layered so thick that the base pattern of purple stone underneath was hardly visible. There were red tints of various charms, golden strands of protective wards, and a cobweb of purest white that could put a ghost's shade to shame. Hermione held it in her blue-violet hands and babbled about how beautiful it was and how excited she was, placing it on the living room table, running fingers over runes only she could see, and telling him in her cheerful voice how she had read of the spells to retrieve strands of memory. He didn't even bother trying to tease her into waiting until after they had eaten the dinner creature had prepared. He was excited too, so excited he felt himself trembling with it. You first, like we agreed. He insisted, and Hermione huffed but held her wand to her head and withdrew silvery strands of memory. When they rested in the bowl, they both leaned over the pensive and together touched and twined fingers to the memory. Harry felt it grab him, the magic in the basin rising to capture his mind, dragging green light down inside its web. Then, abruptly, color came, and Harry felt like he was falling again into confusion. It was flat. Everything was dull, lifeless. The entire world was dead except for a gleam of light flooding in from one side. He stood in a dead world surrounded by colors that made no sense to him. Harry, he heard Hermione's voice, saw movement. This is my memory of the first time I saw Grimmauld Place's library. Harry. He backed away from the movement, shaking his head roughly, unable to speak. She was brown, 4 shades of animal, cat upon horse upon otter upon dog, sheathed in the bright purple of hard granite stone that shouldn't be moving, and it was all so flat. Harry. Her mouth, what had to be her mouth, he knew its shape, moved, but all he could think was that her lips resembled twisted fire. But there was no life in it. Dead hands reached for him, and he shuddered at the sight, backing another step away, eyes rolling across the room in the frenzied hope to find something that made sense. No patterns, only shapes, no life, only thin streams of light. He felt as if he stepped inside a visual representation of an apocalypse. Harry, what's wrong? Her voice was pleading. Against his will, his eyes whipped back to where she stood. Wrong, he thought hectically. Twisted, ugly, wrong. And worse, the room that should have been familiar, that one part of his mind knew was his own library, had no depth to it. He was not sure if he could take even a step and not slam into a painted wall. Nothing made sense. The colors were wrong. There was no movement, no flow of one object into another, no swirl of magic to guide him. He had never seen the world so still and lifeless. Even under his cloak, the pattern moved. It was a nightmare he had never known he had. Seeing his entire world destroyed and dead at his feet, tortured into colors and shapes not their own, and his Hermione, his light, transfigured into a dead mix of animals that moved in some macabre parody of life. I've got to leave. Harry stuttered, and with a frantic twist of power ripped the memory around him to shreds, Hermione's shout echoing in his ears. Light flooded back into his mind. and he had never been so relieved to see its wonderful chaos. He stumbled away from the table, knocking into a decorative podium and falling to the ground, the sound of shattering glass beside him as a lamp fell. Harry! He didn't want to look at her, didn't want to see the horrible, still tan and brown, a tremor moving through him against his will. Blue-violet light grasped his face and made him lift his head, filling his vision with Hermione's unique life. He saw it pulse in the beloved pattern and wilted into her hold as she knelt in front of him, taking deep breaths as he tried to calm his pounding heart. What on earth happened? She growled against his forehead, and he sucked in another breath before replying. Science. He had to think of this rationally. Agnosia. He pushed out the word, latched onto it like a lifeline. He had read of it in his studies years ago when he was trying to understand how and what he saw. Before even entering the wizarding world to get his wand, he had come across the term. What? Hermione asked, and Harry slowly pulled away, drawing himself to his feet, looking around with careful eyes, relieved that his world remained as he understood it. Agnosia. Inability to process some types of sensory information. In my case, in your memory, sight. Harry shook his head roughly, as if that might clear his mind, and felt a little foolish embarrassment rising in his chest. I couldn't handle it. He admitted finally, the words trying to stick in his throat. Hermione wrapped comforting hands around him. Describe what you saw. Her question was familiar, clinical and calm, as if this was merely another one of their experiments in the lab. He supposed it was, one that had just blown up in his face. He felt another tremor go through him, and her arms tightened as he spoke. You were dead. His voice cracked, and he felt his face heat. Everything was dead. Everything was wrong. Shapes and colors, and like a transfiguration spell gone wrong. And you were the worst thing I've ever saw. He stopped, horrified, and tried to clarify. I mean, that is. You looked like a mix of feline and equine with a little dusting of sea otter thrown in, and it made no sense. You were wearing clothes made out of rock, and your mouth was on fire. She began to tremble against him. He pulled away, worried he had hurt her feelings even worse than just calling her the worst thing he ever saw. Hermione made a choked sound, and before he could reach out to touch her face and feel for tears, the sound turned to full-out laughter. He watched her, flummoxed. Why are you laughing? She sucked in choppy air, a hand swiping across her face as purple strands of hair whipped about her head. Oh, Harry. Was so worried you wouldn't like how I looked. And then she began to chuckle. You think I'm the worst thing you've ever seen? She howled with laughter, and Harry frowned. Why are you laughing? He asked. Was she jinxed? Hermione's hands caressed his arms, her light flickering as she shook her head, body still shaking with barely repressed laughter. Because it was so silly. To worry about something like that when you've never seen any woman before in the flesh. Of course you would think we all look like hybrid monsters. The colors are all wrong, and you see light as life, and I only see light coming from the sun or light fixtures. I can't believe I didn't consider that in all my time wasted worrying you wouldn't like how big my breasts are or how wild my hair is. Harry looked down, and rather thought her breasts were the perfect size to fit his hands, from all the times he had been feeling them lately. He had spent a great deal of time with her, and when alone thinking about them, how they felt, the soft skin and subtle scent of her. But he hadn't even noticed them when the animal Hermione had approached in the memory, too horrified to even look closer. You can stop looking at my chest now. Hermione's voice was droll, and Harry's eyes jumped up to meet hers. Men, really. She sighed and leaned against him, but he felt her smile on his neck. She wasn't angry at him. Thank Merlin. Well, Harry said finally, I think it's going to take a lot of practice to get used to seeing that. He tried not to shudder again at the horrible thought. Hermione began to tug him back towards the pensive. In that case, let's look at one of your memories. I want to see something grand. Hogwarts, maybe, or the dragon in the tournament. Harry was so relieved she didn't want to try looking at another one of her memories that he didn't bother to say how doubtful he had been that she could view what he saw. After experiencing the pensive himself, his mind had changed on that score anyway. The dragon, then. Hogwarts could be seen behind the stadium. Harry said, and withdrew the memory with a touch of his red phoenix staff after Hermione had removed her own memory from the bowl. Hold my hand, he said, and took her light in his own. Together, they reached for the silvery liquid and were pulled down once more into overwhelming light. Hermione was surprised that the light was not as bright as she imagined. It gleamed, every color of the rainbow, some brighter than others, some nearly shadows. Most seemed to move, pulsing in gentle rhythms, while others only glowed steadily. She saw the wards first. It was hard to miss the golden glow that made up the sky above them. As the crowd cheered in the memory, Hermione held Harry's hand tight in her own and looked from the gold sky to the purple castle, its shape familiar, but made up of millions of individual lights, like the small pixels of an older computer screen if you held your face centimeters from it. There were too many different colors around her clothes for her to make sense of them. The ground was both green and purple, like she stood on an alien world. It moved like a river, green running water around violet stones, making her sway in sudden dizziness, her mind expecting movement. She turned to Harry and saw him as she normally did, black hair and white skin, not taking on the hues of his memory. He pointed, and she followed its direction to see a hulking mass of orange light, stretching wings of color to the golden sky. The dragon. She breathed, and could see something of ridges along its back, a pattern like fish scales running over its hue. It's beautiful. It moved gracefully, crouched over smaller orange globes, its eggs. Where are you? She asked Harry, and he turned them both. She saw emerald green light, startlingly familiar, approaching them. It was the shade his eyes gleamed with when he looked at her, a look that made her skin tingle with his energy and gave her the increasing desire to wrap him in her arms and feather kisses against his mouth. She frowned suddenly as the green light drew closer. There was something out of place, a different color, deep red like blood. Harry hissed beside her, his hand tightening like a vice around hers, and she felt his power rising, rippling the memory and threatening to shred it as he had her own. What's going on? She asked him, turning away from the green, vaguely human-shaped sphere to face him. His eyes were locked on himself as the green light passed them, following its progress to the dragon. They seemed to burn with intensity and anger. What's wrong? I've never seen myself before, he said, the words falling like stones. I've never seen myself entirely, my hands, my legs, but not. He waved towards himself. Not that, not that. What? She looked again, and her eyes snagged on the bloody red color that crouched upon emerald light, and she suddenly remembered their detailed notes, even as Harry answered her question. Voldemort. Chapter 17. Like a silver nail. Harry took them from the memory. He stepped away from Hermione, raising a hand to his forehead as if he could feel the poison that must be there. We just take it out. Her voice was calm. Right, just like with the locket. He ran his hand over his head to his neck and back, feeling the hair, the skin, the hard bone underneath both, and underneath that there would rest broken red taint. Another soul, another pattern, attached to his own like a tick, waiting to come alive. I have to see it to manipulate it. Harry said dully, one downside to his pattern transfiguration made horribly clear. To remove it, kill it, I've always had to see objects to change their pattern. But Hermione's stutter came back and was overcome with a harsh swallow. But Dumbledore destroyed several, you told me so, with fiendfire. Harry knew his voice was harsh, but his thoughts were also harsh. He thought they could only be destroyed with the destruction of the vessel they possessed. It hasn't hurt you yet. Her voice was desperate. It hasn't affected you. How would I know if I've had it for years? He returned. Since I was an infant. You don't know how you got it. She was angry now. We have time to figure this out. We'll remove it, Harry, and no nonsense about destroying vessels. There has to be a way to create a mirror you can actually see. Then we'll kill it. You can do anything if you only work out how. Harry's head fell to his chest, eyes on the green floor under his feet. He twisted the ring on his finger, its metal warm from his skin. There were some things even he couldn't do, but that sure as hell didn't mean he wasn't going to try anyway. He looked back up at her and lifted his chin. You're right. It hasn't caused me any harm at this point that I can tell. We can monitor any growth or abnormal activity through memories in the pensive. This is just like any other impossibility magic has presented us with. Dumbledore called it a Horcrux. We need to find all we can about them. Hermione grasped his hand hard in hers, light jerking in a firm nod. Exactly. We have our problem now. We research, make hypotheses, and test them until we find what works. And we'll do it again and again until you're free. I know the scientific method by heart. Harry said softly, and let a small smile twist his mouth. You don't have to remind me. Hermione sniffed, but he could feel her relief at his subtle dig with the way she relaxed her rigid stance and leaned into him. All right then, okay. Her voice was slightly lost. I, really like the dragon. Harry pulled her warm light closer, breathing in her scent. Me too. He couldn't let himself despair. He had Hermione, and they had broken the former rules of magic countless times. There would be more than one way to remove a Horcrux, and he would find that way and do it. He was a scientist. He gathered information and used it to solve problems. That's all this was, another problem. Harry rested his head against Hermione's hair, looking out over the light of Grimmauld Place. No matter how long it takes. The rest of the day was spent going through Harry's memories, select scenes picked from his life, each one spent hand in hand as they observed Harry's light and the red stain upon it. Hermione watched him grow, from a small toddling bundle of green light, hesitant in a Dursley house filled with shadows, to a young boy, more confident and sure, casting magic for the first time with purpose, changing blank darkness to streams of light. She had never really understood before how many gaps there were in his vision. It had sounded clinical to hear him talk of synthetic fibers as empty spaces, plastics and vinyl nothing but shadow. But she could finally see it for herself, as a young Harry Potter began to transform his guardian's house, green shining lines of still light where she had only before seen plain brown planks. Harry made the house shine. It looked like a palace of sparkling, colored crystal. And in every chronological scene, as Harry's own unique soul grew larger and older, the red taint upon his face remained, small and oblong, a slash across his face like the splatter of blood. The memory changed again and again. Harry had placed inside the pensive memories of himself in the Dursley house every January, keeping the variables to a minimum as they looked for any growth or change of the Horcrux. It didn't move from its placement, nor grow substantially in size, remaining across the face in every scene. She found herself only looking at it at the beginning of each change, before purposefully looking away, looking at anything but at the horrible stain, so vivid and horrendous, a pollution in her best friend and lover. It didn't belong. It made her furious and scared at the same time. But logic told her it was not, yet, an immediate threat. At the end of the last memory, taken only months before, Harry tugged her hand and pulled them free of the pensive. His face was blank and cold, green eyes staring straight ahead into nothing. No change. At this point, I theorize it is dormant, unable to think for itself. I can conclude that the sliver of a soul must have some form of ritual to activate it into either outright possession or exorcism into a new body. Hermione brightened a bit. Can we do that? Transfer it to a new body and then kill it? Harry's eyes did not move towards her voice, but his hand holding hers began to slowly squeeze, running an absent finger against her palm. Maybe. I haven't studied necromancy from that angle yet. Yet. Hermione had no doubt it was on his mental list, though, and had been ever since he began to realize the scope of his own abilities regarding possible resurrection. She leaned closer, moving around the swirling pensive to press her head into his shoulder, mumbling her thoughts against his shirt. Dormant, okay, we can W work with that. The stutter in her voice annoyed her, but she pushed the emotion away. She felt Harry raise his arms to hold her close, his chest lifting in a long sigh. Yes, I plan to start a clumancy practice right away to make sure any mental connections, if any, are also dormant. From what I have read, most mental attacks take place in dreams, and I don't dream. I might not have noticed an effect of the scar because of that. Hermione's brows furrowed in thought, then she pulled away slightly, looking up into his face, eyes unwillingly roving over the twisted scar she barely noticed any more. Pale, jagged lines crossed from one side of his face to the other, across both eyes and the bridge of his nose. A horizontal slash that was all too recognizable now to the bulk of the wizarding world, who had first claimed it resembled a lightning bolt, Dumbledore. Maybe if one turned their head to the side and envisioned the devastation of electric light in a night sky. It certainly tore across his face like a burn, splitting his eyebrows in 3 places, deeply indenting the skin above his nose and the sides of his face. But all this time, she had only thought it a symbol, a scar, a battle wound. Horrible, yes, but nothing more. Now it seemed far more sinister. Her eyes moved to his, still staring straight forward, looking at something she now knew was a wall of purple and grey. If it has mental effects, it could be the reason you see the way you do. Hermione said softly, almost afraid to raise the possibility. Harry dipped his head in a nod. I've considered the fact that removing it could leave me permanently blind in truth. Hermione quickly refuted that. Or it could give you normal sight. Harry shuddered around her, and the realization that he considered that worse than actual blindness brought a reluctant smile to her face. Nearly worth keeping the thing to prevent that, he grumbled. Nearly. Hermione rolled her eyes, despite knowing the gesture was lost on him. It's not so bad, you know, being normal. We would be able to visit the alley without starting a mob. Harry smiled, his gaze dropping down to stare at her face, eyes moving across it with fond movements. Doubtful. You're far too beautiful to not start a riot. At that idiocy, Hermione laughed, one fist raising to thump his shoulder. I think you're trying to get some with that comment. He leaned closer, grinning. Is it working? She went for an insulted tone, loving that he was smiling again after hours of worry. Absolutely not. His hands ran down her side, one slipping under her shirt with quick movements. You sure? He growled it in her ear, and Hermione squealed when he suddenly ducked and grabbed her behind the knees, lifting her up with a grunt. You're heavy, he muttered, and Hermione smacked him again. Let me down, idiot. She laughed it, unable to do more when he began to stumble towards the stairs. You'll drop me on my head. Never, Harry declared, and she was forced to quickly lean in when the banister nearly struck her. Well, most likely not. Hermione laughed again, her body shaking, as Harry's shoulder collided with the doorframe with a painful thump. He groaned, but his arms didn't loosen until he tumbled her across his bed. He stood, looking down at her, lips twisted into a triumphant grin. Hermione raised a brow at him, shuddering at the energy that sparked as his magic moved across her skin. Just because you somehow managed to carry me up the stairs does not mean. Was cut off when he leaped upon her, mouth moving unerringly over hers. When he pulled away, their breath heavy, he was still smiling. Viola. At his word for her, Hermione melted inside. She reached up and ran a hand through his long, messy hair. I love you too. The vibrant green light still lit his gaze as he looked at her, face sly. Then she felt his fingers creeping back underneath her shirt. With a grin of her own, she pulled his face back down to hers and let her own hands roam as well. I'm still not sure about this. The words were a muted grumble as Ron Weasley scowled down at his scuffed shoes. Beside him, Neville glanced uncomfortably at the muggles streaming by around them. This is the right address. Neville shifted closer to Ron, elbowing him sharply when the redhead did not answer. Dad said it was. Ron huffed, squinting at the engraved number 12 marked in a bold brass plate next to a simple wooden door. This is Grimmauld Place. Neville lifted his chin, straightening with brave effort. He supposed it made sense that Potter chose to live in a muggle neighborhood, but it still struck him as odd. Ready? He asked, and Ron's tall form let out another low, growling grumble of reluctance. It was close to the full moon, but Neville hadn't wanted to wait once he convinced Ron that they should return the map. After he had told his friends about the true owner of the invisibility cloak, they had all been on edge, wondering if there would be any form of retribution. But when none came right away, the others had been even more reluctant to part with the Marauder's map. They had all been close to Professor Lupin, and all felt some responsibility for the death of Sirius Black. They hadn't been able to save either wizard, and the map was all that remained of them both. But in the end, Neville had got them to give it up out of fear, if not respect. The possibility that Lord Potter might come for his father's map was enough to make them give it a fond farewell. Then Ron had informed his dad that he had come into possession of what he thought was a Potter heirloom, and Arthur Weasley hadn't had much trouble digging through paperwork to find the address of the Wisengamot's newest member. Really, when he thought about it, it was far too easy to come about important information like that. The hard part had been convincing Mr. Weasley to let himself and Ron go alone to deliver it, instead of sending a polite owl, or better yet, letting a ministry employee do the deed. Ron hadn't told him his father's reaction outright, but it was obvious that the ministry, like most of the public, found the blind sorcerer disconcerting at best and terrifying at worst. Neville himself wasn't certain how to feel. He only knew he wasn't keen on knocking on the door. You knock. He blurted the words, and Ron lifted his lips in a slight snarl, his teeth a bit sharper than was polite in human company. You knock. This was your bloody idea. Neville couldn't argue with that logic, and they were currently wasting time and managing to look quite odd. He saw a passing muggle give them a curious glance and straightened his shoulders. Fine. He stepped up to the wooden door, and without pausing to think through, again, the many reasons this might not be a good idea, rapped his knuckles harshly against the center panel. Even as Ron stepped up beside him, the door began to open. For a moment, he was confused. The hallway loomed beyond, empty, surprisingly well lit, and clean for a place he had, in his imagination, felt should be dark and gloomy. It was the lair of a very powerful blind wizard, after all. Shouldn't there be cobwebs and smoky torches or something? And it was empty. Neville frowned. What do you want? The raspy, confrontational tone made him jump in surprise. Ron, on the other hand, had seen what Neville hadn't. Or perhaps his heightened sense of smell had done the trick. It was hard to surprise a werewolf. A wizened house elf glowered up at them, bulbous eyes narrowed with scorn. Neville saw its eyes flickering over their mismatched muggle clothes with distaste. This wasn't like the elves of Hogwarts, who were all smiles and helpful hands. Nor was it like the few personal house elves he had met at the parties he was forced to attend at his grandmother's side. Cowering, timid little things. This elf looked like it might slam the door back in their face, and grin while it did so. We need to speak with Harry Potter, please. Ron broke the silence, a courteous smile attempting to form on his pale, freckled face. Neville could tell that platitudes would not work on this creature. It only sniffed in disdain, as haughty as any pure-blooded Slytherin confronted with muggle-born riffraff. Is the master expecting you? Neville hesitated slightly, exchanging a quick glance with Ron. This was not going as he planned. Then again, he had been expecting what amounted to a dimly lit dungeon, with Lord Potter staring grimly out of it like he had stared out of the Daily Prophet's front page months ago. Not the bright hallway illuminated beyond, nor the extremely unhappy but overall normal-looking house elf. We have something for him. It's his dad's. Or well, we think it's his dad's. Neville began. Ron nodded emphatically and repeated their mission. We're almost positive it's his dad's. The elf, wearing a spotless length of satin cloth, held out one wrinkled hand, palm up. Hand it over, then. Creature will see it gets to the master. Neville lifted his chin. We would rather give it to him in person. The house elf smiled. It was a savage smile, far too similar to that of a goblin. It made a shiver go down the back of his spine. No one sees the master without prior notification, no solicitations, no interviews, and no speaking. Neville had never heard sarcasm from a house elf, but he could swear the elf was taunting them as it continued. Master is busy. Yous may leave names and letters by owl. And damn if the elf didn't begin to close the door in their faces. Ron let out a growl and put one hand up flat against the door, halting its progress. Now you see here, you little beast, I won't. The house elf's grin got wider. Neville took a step back, one hand going up to tug at his friend's sleeve. Ron, come on, we can send a letter first. The devil we will. Ron's voice was rising in volume. Neville felt his face begin to flush. He knew how unstable Ron could be during the last few days before a moon. Irrational barely began to cover it. Just because this pompous thing refuses to, he saw the magic building the same time Ron did, the elf's hands beginning to glow with spell light. The werewolf jumped back in response as if scalded, shaking his hand furiously, his face reddening with rage. It attacked me. In response, the house elf only slammed the door with a loud slap. Neville stared blankly ahead, where he had last seen its malevolent eyes, lit with evil delight. Okay, that was not what I expected. Harry frowned into the lit darkness of the cloak, his meditation interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. He had been trying to clear his mind. The first steps of occlumency were frustrating at best, and Harry found that attempting to think of nothing was far harder than any other task he had yet attempted. He had too many thoughts, and when he wasn't thinking of his latest project, he was worrying over the Horcrux, and when he wasn't doing that, he was thinking about Hermione. She had started her last year in London and had already started an entire binder of notes on potential places to enroll in college and what she planned to study at each location. He hated to limit her in any way, but the selfish part of him wanted her to stay nearby. Better yet, stay with him while she studied wherever she picked. He lay still on the couch in the living room, jolted again from his continually roving thoughts by a raised shout. He pulled the cloak off himself, leaving it puddled on the cushions as he walked into the hallway, desperate for some distraction, and arriving just in time to see the yellow form of creature slam green light right into the distinctive pattern of a werewolf with a loud crack. He blinked, frowned. Werewolf. A very familiar-looking werewolf pattern at that. But why? Creature has taken care of it, master. The house. Elf sounded very pleased with himself. What did he want? Creature hesitated slightly, his yellow form bobbing. They says they have something of masters, but Creature does not believe them. Little wizard boys lie all the time, especially Weasleys. The surname was said with scorn. Harry sighed. Creature might have accepted himself and Hermione, but some habits from his previous family were ingrained deep, and snobbery was one of them. Let them in, please. He heard his elf suck in a scandalized breath, but yellow light rotated and spun, reaching for the solid green door. As you wish, master. The elf muttered, and by his tone Harry knew he was going to get his revenge. There would no doubt be barely cooked beef for breakfast for at least a week. It wasn't just Ron Weasley at his door. The rich green and deep brown tones of Neville Longbottom greeted him as well, and this time Harry knew the exact word for the shade of his pattern. Chrysochloros. Thanks to his and Hermione's pensive expeditions, his vocabulary of colours had expanded from mere hundreds to thousands, and he was much more certain he was correct at labelling them. And while chrysochloros might be a mouthful, it labelled Longbottom perfectly. Green fading to an almost golden brown, like living leaves touched by the first hint of decay. So, we have something that's yours, or we think you might want it. Harry blinked and realized that the color he was scrutinizing was shifting uncomfortably. He also realized he was probably looking straight at the man's chest. Right, this way. Harry turned and moved back into the living room, gesturing to a seat as he absently gathered his cloak and placed it aside. He heard one of the boys gasp, probably Weasley, from the tone and direction of it. Before he could question what might be wrong, Longbottom spoke again. It's a long story, but we've had this map of Hogwarts. But it wasn't ours at first, Ron. The fawn-colored pattern startled at the sound of his name, and Harry swore he saw the Lupin overtone become more predominant for a second. He now could see why he had not been certain of it at first. The fur-like texture of werewolf was much stronger than he remembered it being 3 years ago. Was it the age of the disease, the proximity to the full moon? It was my brother's first, and they stole it from Filch, from the box of confiscated things in his office. And well, it had these signatures on it. The Marauders, they called themselves. My brothers idolized them, but they gave us the map in third year, after this series of break-ins in Gryffindor Tower, because Mum wouldn't let me go to Hogsmeade and... Marauders, my father. Harry broke in when he sensed the story was about to degenerate into a topic not relevant to the conversation. He had heard that term before. He had paid attention when Hermione read to him the interviews given in The Prophet about his father and their friends, about the Marauders' tragedy. Twisted tale of betrayal and lies that had surrounded them all, and how in the end Sirius Black and Remus Lupin had paid the greatest price for that deceit and the previous minister's pride. But they were all dead now. He himself had seen Peter Pettigrew killed by the Ministry when they finally got the right traitor. Yeah. Neville's voice was muted, emotion he could not discern coloring it. Padfoot, Prongs, Moony, Wormtail. We figured, really, it should be yours. You're the only family left to claim it. Harry glanced between the two patterns, men now more than the boys they had been before. May I see it? Pale brown light flickered, moving aside green wrappings to pull free a gleaming cylinder, unraveling it slowly, smoothing out what must be crinkled edges based on the sound. You activate it by touching a wand to the surface and saying, I solemnly swear I'm up to no good. Then deactivate it with mischief managed. That was my brother's favorite part. It's activated now. His voice was both fond and sad. Harry stared down at the green parchment, uncertain how to feel himself. His blood father had made it. James Potter, a man he did not remember and knew scarcely anything about. He had no stories about the man, other than the few mentions from his aunt. The sporadic letters she retained from his mother that spoke of an annoying boy growing to be a handsome man, a bully who became a defender, their wedding invitation, which contained a single picture. His aunt had described him as tall, wild black hair, brown eyes full of bad intentions. She said he resembled him sometimes. Harry knew she really meant that he resembled him if he did not have the grotesque scars splitting his face in two. He had his mother's eyes. Only his own were at once both less useful and far better. But if Harry had any father now, it was Vernon Dursley, as gruff as the man could be, and the map in front of him was nothing but sparkling verdant light, obviously enchanted, but completely useless at fulfilling its purpose for him. The only fascinating thing about it was the odd spark of different hues scattered across it, hinting at the reflections of soul patterns. It shows all the secret corridors of Hogwarts, or at least the ones they discovered, and it shows where everyone is in the school. Great for avoiding teachers after curfew. The last was said as an aside, a flicker of light casually nudging the boy next to him in remembrance of some escapade. It's a brilliant piece of spellwork. Professor Lupin said it took them years to perfect it, only it got taken by Filch in their last year. They didn't recreate it, cause, well, it just wasn't that important anymore. Weasley finished lamely, and Harry did not have to see him to know the man was choking on some emotion. The Daily Prophet hadn't spoken much of the relationship Lupin and Black might have had with the heroes of Hogwarts, but he had no doubt, as short as it had been important for the boys to be willing to confront the Ministry so very publicly over the two wizards. What were they like, Lupin and Black? He saw their lights flicker in surprise and darken again with sorrow. Professor Lupin was brilliant, the best defense professor we've ever had, and we've had plenty. Neville laughed softly, but it was the laughter of a man who had to choose between humor and anger. He knew just what to say, just how to teach something. Snape hated him on sight, but Lupin said it was old history. He told us Snape made his wolfsbane potion, and I found it hard he would be willing to drink it. Poison and all that. We all hated Snape, though, so there's that. He makes my potion now, Ron murmured. Couldn't afford it otherwise. I still hate him, though. Neville picked up the story with the ease of friends well used to telling one. Dumbledore said he feels guilty he didn't get there in time to stop Moony, the werewolf. He saw what was happening on the map that night. It was on Professor Lupin's desk when he went to deliver the potion, but it was chaos. There were 4 of us running around like rabbits. He saved 3 of us. Ron laughed harshly. 4? He saved me too. I'm not dead. Sorry, mate, Neville muttered. You know what I meant. Brown light flickered again in what might have been a dismissive gesture. I know. Professor Lupin, though, he was great. Really calm all the time, so calm I can't imagine how he held the wolf at bay. You could tell he was poor, and no wonder with how hard it is to get a job with our disease. Dressed shabby, and pale, sickly. It's really surprising that we didn't put together his monthly sick leaves, but no one did. Or at least, no one said anything about it. He tried to teach us the Patronus charm. Neville's tone was forced cheerfulness. The Dementors were around that year, and I had a bad reaction to them. We were able to make a silvery mist before Christmas. And Black? Harry asked, when the silence grew between them. He ran one hand absently across the soft cloak in his lap, dark light flickering from another thing that had once been his father's. Gold and green lengthened, shifted, sighed as Neville spoke. We didn't get to meet him, not really, not for more than a few minutes. It all happened so fast, too fast. I guess you read about it in the papers. When Harry nodded, he continued. We told them everything, even what Dumbledore wanted to keep quiet, all except Snape's involvement. We felt they were owed that after Sirius had been incarcerated so long. Sirius broke into the tower, and when he took Ron, we all followed him out. Dean and Seamus got stunned, but I revived them. I had been hiding under this cloak, just in case. Then the professor arrived, and Sirius told us the entire story about Ron's rat, the truth. We believed him when we saw Peter, and in the thick of it they forgot about the moon. Sirius yelled at us to run, then Snape was there, and the 2 of them got into a duel. I remember when he began to transform. It was like watching a human body explode, first sprouting every which way, and the screams. Ron's voice faded, and it was sympathy and not horror in his voice. The man was very familiar now with the reason for those screams. Lupin went for us. Padfoot, Sirius's animagus form, blocked him at first. But a dog ain't anything for a werewolf. It did give Snape enough time to send us all scampering back to the castle wards. We had been in the Shrieking Shack, you see, outside the main body of the wards. There was a passageway there through the Whomping Willow, but we couldn't get back into the passage. We had to run across the hill or to the forest. My leg was broken, though. Ran's voice was calm, wrote. He had told this story many times before. I couldn't run. Snape had me on a stretcher, but the locomotor spell is slow. Mooney got to me, and it wasn't pretty. Snape didn't let him kill me, but it was damn close anyway. When I woke up in the hospital wing, they told me Sirius and the professor were dead, kissed by the Dementors. The only news worse than that was that I was a werewolf, and even that just felt like one more bad thing, just one more horrible bad thing on top of all the other horrible things. Like a nightmare. Neville agreed, then sighed. And the reporters kept coming, sniffing for a story and misprinting half of everything we said. The ministry was there, trying to shut us up at the same time. Fudge himself gave us a talk, which included a few illegal spells, and Dumbledore banned him from school grounds. Finally, we called a press conference, and that was that. Everyone knew the truth. The silence grew again, and Harry couldn't help but think that if karma was a true magical force, it had well and truly punished the boys for laughing Hermione into the doomed bathroom during her first year. We should have given you the map then. His voice hesitant, Ron made a slow gesture with his hands that Harry could follow. But we didn't know where you were. Back then, some people were skeptical you even existed. The professor was sad about that, you know. He missed your father, and he always talked about all the stories he would have liked to share with you. They were all Gryffindors, and he rather thought you would have been too. Neville spoke when Ron wound to a stop. Then, in fourth year, we thought it would be useful for the tournament, and Hermione was so angry, and I guess we were too, at ourselves as much as her. Too little, too late, all around. And when it was over, there were the executions, and you disappeared again. I guess we just let it slide. But here it is. Ron's voice was abruptly harsh as he shoved the map toward Harry, interrupting his friend. It's yours. Harry looked at the map again. A part of him would have liked to study just how his father long ago had managed to copy soul patterns onto a map, and no doubt Hermione would be thrilled as well, no matter how much she disliked Hogwarts itself. But he wasn't callous, and though James Potter was his father, he wasn't his dad. He could tell by the way the boys spoke that they felt far more attachment for the piece of parchment than he himself ever could. He couldn't even use it, after all. You have one more year of school left, correct? Your seventh term. Yes. Neville spoke the answer like it was a question. Harry gestured down to the map. Keep it for your last term. I can't use it here anyway. I would like to study it eventually, but I have other projects currently taking up my time. Ron didn't hesitate to begin rolling the map back up, stuffing it back into one large green pocket. Neville wasn't so certain. Are you sure? It was your dad's. I don't remember him, and I have many things of his from the Potter vault. I won't miss this one. He had the cloak, too, and it was more than enough. It was more than the total sum of everything else his father had owned. He pressed a hand into its surface and smiled slightly. Neville's pattern twisted, and it took Harry a moment to realize he was bowing. Pureblood wizards were odd like that, even the light-affiliated ones. Thank you. This means a lot to us. All of us, Dean and Seamus too. Thought you would be angry. Harry stood, shrugged. He was not sure how to explain the way he felt. His father was dead. Harry did not miss him, not even the way Neville and Ron obviously mourned Lupin's passing. He had a family, he was loved. He had his aunt and uncle, Dudley and Hermione, the Grangers. He didn't need the Marauder's map to feel a connection with a father he had never known. What was he like? Dean asked, lounging back lazily into the large sofa that graced the Weasley home. Seamus, on the other hand, sat forward, eyes riveted on Ron. Ron looked at Neville and saw the same conflict in his friend's eyes. Rational, very, very rational, Neville finally said. Calm. Ron clarified quietly. It was the day after the moon, and he was exhausted. And as was their habit during the summer, his friends had come to distract him. Like a Kneasel, a very large, intimidating Kneasel. And he hated Kneasels, mostly because they hated him on sight. He had yet to find one that didn't arch its spine and glare at him when he got close. He was quiet. He just listened to us mostly, asked some questions. He looked really normal, except, well, his face. Scars are as bad up close as the ones across my chest where the wolf got me. Ron added. Neville frowned. I was thinking more of his eyes. They didn't glow like the papers claimed, but they never looked right at me, just stared. Dean rolled his eyes. He's blind, dolt. Of course he didn't look at you. Seamus shook his head. But he can see. Everyone says so. Dean looked at Seamus like he was a pitiful crup. If someone is blind, they can't see. That's what blind means. I'm not an idiot. I know what blind means. Seamus lunged for him, and the two boys fell to the floor in a heap, Dean taunting the smaller, freckled teen. Ran sighed, unable to raise the energy to join in. Neville moved closer, voice raised to be heard over their friends. It bothered me that he didn't want the map. I would kill to have something like that of my father's. I do have some stuff, of course, but I wouldn't give up anything. Not a single piece of what I have. Ron knew Neville's father wasn't dead. Neither was his mother, but they might as well be. I wasn't going to argue with him. I liked keeping it a little longer, wish we hadn't lost the cloak, but he seemed attached to it at least. Did you see how he held it? I swear he ran his hands across it at least 5 times while we were talking, like he was petting a Kneasel. Neville agreed with a smirk. Ron managed a smile. Yeah, just like that. And what Ron didn't say was that he could have sworn he'd seen the silver invisibility cloak move from beside the blind man into his lap, just like an idle Kneasel. And just like a Kneasel, he could have sworn he'd seen it arch into the hand that caressed it. Harry had to find quiet to meditate, and darkness. He sought both underneath the cloak on the days Hermione did not come over. Occlumency. From the Latin occluder, to shut up, and mens, the mind. It took an incredible amount of willpower to shut up one's mind. There were simply too many things to think about. He started by focusing on one single thing. Technically, advanced occlumency was just that, not thinking about things one wanted hidden so that an invading mind could not find them. Therefore, one thought only about the things one did not want hidden. He thought about the cloak. He focused every iota of his mind on it, on deciphering light from darkness when there was no true barrier between them, on counting the stars that were at times pinpricks of light, at other times pools of darkness, moving, alive, and at times he swore there was sentience in its pattern. When a thought from outside began to intrude, he forced it out. When he thought of the Horcrux, he made himself focus only harder on the cones and prisms of the pattern around him. When he thought of Hermione's skin under his fingers, he instead ran his hand across the silk of darkness made into light. He made his mind retain and reflect the impossible invisibility cloak, the unchangeable pattern, the unmakeable one. He fell asleep to its light and woke to its darkness. And after a month of nightly practice, he sat in the middle of the living room of Grimmauld Place, the cloak spread on the floor in front of him, thoughts and colors and sounds and smells pressing onto him from all angles, and without the soft silk around him, brought its pattern up in his mind and made himself look inside. And he thought of absolutely nothing until Hermione's heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway to interrupt his silence. With a smile, he jumped to his feet to celebrate his success in the best way he knew how. "Can you really see inside your own mind?" Hermione asked softly, as they lay together in front of the fire, the smell of wood smoke lingering in the air. The rug was scratchy under his bare skin, but Harry didn't feel like moving yet. It was too nice to have Hermione against him, warm and sated, her hands idly running down his side. "It's not like seeing as you or I know it," he murmured thoughtfully. "It's like feeling, like knowing where I begin and end inside myself, like exploring the edges with my fingers to find the true shape of a thing. It's like learning the pattern of a soul by touch alone." "Your soul, then?" Her breath was against his neck, and for a moment he was distracted. "Do you know where yours ends and the Horcrux begins?" Harry looked into the fire, a scarlet monster devouring its defenseless prey 1 centimeter at a time. "I know that it is only me inside of me." Occlumency protects the mind from exterior influences. It would not be useful against something that was inside that sphere. But there is a convergence. It lies against one side, like one river running into another. Something of what is in it has tainted some part of me. "Possession," the word was whispered, hardly more than a breath, but Harry sensed the fear more in her body's stillness than in her voice. "No, it's like a scar, a mental one as deep as the physical one I bear. It probably happened when the Horcrux first attached itself to me. I believe, based on my own research into souls, that that scar will remain even once the soul is removed. If anything, it will be more noticeable once it is gone. Underneath the red." He nodded at her statement, gently running his fingers through her hair. "I suppose that makes my soul more fragile. I've seen cracks, scars on other souls. I've seen some so close to shattering that recovery seems impossible. He thought of Hermione's cousin, her beautiful pattern once nearly broken over a year before. He thought of the last time he had seen her weeks ago, how those cracks had closed and melded together, leaving nothing but the faintest spiderweb of scars across its surface. Would it be easier for such a soul to break, if put under stress? Or did those scars make one stronger? Hermione spoke, and the parallel of her thoughts and his own dazzled him. I don't think so. I think it makes you stronger, not more fragile. Scars are a sign of strength, that you've overcome something horrible. Harry's hand moved through her hair again, his fingers finding the scars that lay on her own skin, hidden but present. 6 years ago, something terrible had happened to her, too. I love you. A simple statement, but meaning so many things. It frustrated him, sometimes, just how little the three words could portray what he felt. But he had no better words. He felt her smile, saw her blue-violet light shine brilliantly. Sometimes the words were enough. Then removing it won't hurt you. What damage is done won't change or become worse. Harry smiled, and this time his fingers flickered down her spine. Yes, if only I could remove the blasted thing. She nodded in agreement. Harry saw yellow light flicker into the room and just as quickly flicker out, leaving behind only the increased warmth of a freshly stoked fire. Creature wouldn't let them freeze, even when they were foolish enough to lay naked in the large living room in the beginning of winter, a room heated only by a single wide fireplace. Hermione sighed, lax and warm. Harry glanced towards the cloak, spread out where he had left it hours before. With hardly a thought about what he wanted to do, he called to it, opening himself just as he had when he looked inside his soul, mirroring a pattern, one brother to another. The stone on his middle finger heated comfortably, just enough to make its presence known. It, too, was darkness and light. Then the cloak settled over them both, and Hermione relaxed even further. She wouldn't like that creature had seen her naked, and he rather liked to keep the sight to himself as well. Your blasted invisibility cloak. I suppose we now look like two heads rolled off a wall onto the floor. Her voice was low, drowsy, amused. If she didn't leave soon, she would be late getting home again. And even though she apparated now and no longer relied on public transportation, her parents would worry. He couldn't let her fall asleep, though he desperately wanted to. Wanted to lay beside her every night and wake up to her every morning. Probably. When she began to doze, he looked at her, running his magic across her face to see her closed eyes, their lashes long and delicate, her nose, her mouth, her chin. At the touch of his energy, her eyes blinked open. He felt the shiver run through her, from her head down to her toes, her feet flexing against his own. I have to go. She yawned it, and he reluctantly let her loose as she rose to gather her scattered clothes. Classes come early tomorrow morning. When she left, taking her beautiful light with her, Harry gathered the cloak around himself and stood, walking slowly up to his bedroom to fall onto his cold bed, and considered what age would be appropriate to ask a girl to move in with him. Or at least, what age would make a father like John Granger not try to wring his neck. Chapter 18. A Plum Robe. Creature, with a swirl of yellow the house, Elf appeared inside his room, the pop of transportation muffled to nearly inaudible efficiency. He had tested that phenomenon the year before. The louder the pop, the farther the elf had traveled. It was practically a gunshot when he had sent Creature to France and back. No wonder wizards seldom traveled far by house elf. Yes, master, Harry sighed, refocusing on his current problem, his closet. Can you get me the plum robes? They all bloody look the same to me. There was a reason he stuck to basic black robes. They worked with everything. Whoever had decided that all Wisengamot members had to wear a specific shade of plum during session was obviously insane. Hermione theorized it was because that shade of plum had once been devilishly expensive, and it was therefore one more way of keeping the poorer lords and ladies from taking their rightful seats. Here it is, master. Yellow light pressed green fabric gently into his hands. Harry smiled and twisted, shrugging the heavy garment on. At least it was cold. He could hardly imagine wearing them during the summer. Then again, that's what cooling charms were apparently for. Thank you. I'm eating dinner with my family tonight, so you have the house to yourself today. Harry hesitated briefly. If you could go on vacation, where would you go? There was a moment of incredulous silence. Vacation? Yeah, for a break, to get away. The elf sniffed. Creature does not need a break. He resisted the urge to roll his eyes. I know you don't need one. I'm saying if you wanted to, where would you go? More silence. At least the elf was thinking about it. The last few times Harry had questioned him over topics relating to things he had never had because of his contract, he had been obstinate. Creature supposes. Creature may like to visit a garden. Black Manor used to have gardens when Creature is a young elf. The gardens were good. It was more than Harry expected to get. He smiled. In that case, go visit a garden if you want today. If you have to have some task, then buy some flowers for Hermione. She loves them. Yes, Master Harry, sir. With another swirl of light, the elf left, slightly faster than was polite. He probably thinks I'm going to force him to take wages next, Harry mused, which is exactly what is going to happen. With the letter that had given him the information required to take up his seats had come a portkey that activated an hour before every quarterly meeting, a fact Harry was extremely grateful for. Actually, getting to the ministry might have been difficult without one, at least while he was wearing what muggles would no doubt think was a ridiculous nightgown. He hadn't wanted to ask Hermione to apparate him in, either, or she would have had to take a day from her classes. Of course, portkeys were horrible in their own very nauseous way. When the wildly swirling colors came to rest, Harry took a deep, steadying breath, leaning a bit heavily on his staff for balance. Step forward, clear the area for the next traveler. A male voice intoned with obvious boredom. Harry began to walk forward and ignored when said board pattern flickered with shock. He also ignored it when the other colors moved out of his path, some knocking rudely into one another. Most of all, he ignored the people who seemed think he was deaf as well as blind, as they whispered to one another about his presence, and wearing the standard getup of a Wisengamot member. No doubt, there would be a special edition of the Daily Prophet. He stepped onto the lifts and waited to descend, not in the least surprised that the only fellow riders brave enough to share the box with him were auras whose patterns he found familiar enough. Two of the guards who used to rotate on Potter duty. You need help getting to your seat, Lord Potter. The words were courteous and not in the least condescending. Harry couldn't have asked for a better coincidence. I know it's on level 2, but an escort would not be turned down. I've only ever been to the Auror offices. It would be nice to not find himself in the wrong room. He certainly couldn't read any signs. His plan had been to follow the most colors and hopefully spot a familiar pattern or two that he knew were on the council. Of course. I'm Aura Fallen. This is Aura Vaughn. Grey-green and blue-green, or more specifically, Amazon and Bangladesh, as he had called them in his mind. Two of his previously more common guards, though not the ones on duty the night Voldemort attacked. If he was not mistaken, the two often worked as a pair and had a fondness for Muggle sweets, based on their frequent stops at one particular vendor on his walk to school. It is nice to meet two of the Auras who used to watch me. Were you told to wait in the atrium for me to arrive? Light flashed in surprise, a quickened heartbeat, blood thrumming in their veins, but just as quickly it settled. No, sir. It was Vaughn who spoke this time. We did think maybe you might take up your seats this session. And we all know the ministry is a rat warren. It's hard for any bloke to find their way around the first few times. Fallen finished for his partner, and he obviously was not just any bloke. These two would know that better than even the general public, and neither one was reacting with the paranoia or fear he had come to expect. Thank you. It would be appreciated if you might find your path coinciding with my own at the next meeting as well. Our pleasure. The voice announced their arrival at level 2, and Vaughn stepped out first, beginning to lead the way, Fallen falling into step behind him. The Wisengamot was about as dull as he expected. 4 dragging hours of bureaucracy, an issue being announced by one member, then discussed by the masses. Perhaps 3/4 of the seats were full. A third of those seats were appointed by the current minister. It seemed most of the inherited lords had better things to do than sit, and calmly, or not so calmly, fight about the current state of Nocturne Alley, the new regulations on St. Mungo's infectious ward, and the potential construction of a wizarding zoo in the heart of a rural Muggle community. Harry remained silent, not unaware that his presence had caused a stir. No one in this room, at least, had expected him to actually turn up. Even Dumbledore's familiar pattern had displayed the telltale flicker, but by the passing of the first hour, he had nearly been forgotten. By the fourth, he might as well be invisible. That worked for him. He was able to observe the various waves of power in the room. Dumbledore, the chief warlock, seemed mostly impartial, only gently steering the occasional tangent to more peaceable terminology, and ending the discussion when he saw it degenerating. The minister and his undersecretary presided over one side of the court, the more conservative viewpoints. Amelia Bones, her pattern a pretty light blue cyan, headed the more liberal side along with Griselda Marchbank's old and deep midnight blue. The witch must be older than even Dumbledore by the slow movements of her pattern, and scattered between them, around and alongside where he himself sat, were what he had begun to think of as the swing votes, the stubborn, the contrary, and the simply undecided. No doubt most had some bone to pick with either side, but had no wish to be affiliated with the opposite side either. Oddly enough, however, there were no official parties, and both Bones and Scrimgeour agreed amicably enough on the matter of restructuring Nocturne Alley and implementing stricter regulations at St. Mungo's. The zoo, however, was another story, and one he was quite tired of hearing about, with no doubt the majority of the rest of the Wisengamot. It was a relief when Dumbledore ended the argument with a polite request for more information to be presented at the next meeting. Are there any more issues to be raised before the Wisengamot? His strong voice echoed around the chamber, and various members began murmuring to one another. None stepped forward, however. Harry braced himself. Now or never. He stood, purposefully leaving the staff propped against his seat. There was a wave of movement, a rainbow of colors turning as one. Silence fell without prompting. "Yes, Lord Potter," Dumbledore asked calmly, and Harry lifted his chin. He wanted to look, to judge reactions by facial expressions. But Vaughan had told him the room was, while lit well, still dim enough among the seats that no doubt glowing eyes would be noticed. He had no wish to intimidate. At least, not yet. "I wish to open discussion of the inhumane contracts binding sentient creatures into service. In particular, the degrading actions by the House Elf Registry Office, where house elves are bred and enslaved without their consent and left purposefully uneducated in order to brainwash them into believing that said contracts are to their benefit." There was a moment of complete silence. Harry waited for the outcry, and when none came, continued. "These contracts have no stipulation for compensation of any kind, require elves to dress in pillowcases that are often soiled, and bind them unto death with no exit clause. It allows them to be abused by anyone who holds their contract, and leaves them unable to defend themselves or their families. It is a despicable black stain on the wizarding world that we have allowed creatures capable of higher thought and emotion to be treated in such a way." At that, the murmurs started. A shade of green called out, "But they want to serve us. They have to." The tone fell just short of chiding. Harry raised his chin. "It is true that house elf magic is symbiotic to wizarding kind. Without that relationship, they would be unable to practice it. By serving a wizard, an elf is stronger, lives longer, and should be happier. However, they are not required to be beaten when disobedient, or worse, made to punish themselves in horrible ways. One such contract at the registry states that an elf who refuses to comply with any order must iron his fingers on the very first offense, break them on the second, and have one digit removed from each on continuous offenses. House elves, who are a matriarchal and monogamous species, should not be required to have children outside of their choice, and then have those children taken from them and sold for profit. A house elf should not have to work for nothing but that symbiotic relationship, receiving no wages, no vacation time, no choice. A house elf whose master is abusive should have the ability to leave that master and seek another. No witch or wizard would suffer such treatment. No witch or wizard would allow their familiar to suffer it. I doubt many would allow even their livestock to suffer it." He lifted one hand and cut it across the air in front of him for emphasis. "It is well timed that the Wisengamot looks again at any contract that binds and abuses sentient creatures. It is time to discuss the rights all beings should have." Harry sat then. He had said his piece, and now it was time to see if a 17-year-old could have any influence at all on his first session of the Wisengamot. Amelia Bones called out, her words sharp. "I have long thought the House Elf Registry was a cruel entity. I support this discussion." Minister Scrimgeour was only a heartbeat behind. Any being with sentience has the ability to be both law-abiding and law-breaking, but no laws should be purposefully used to enslave a species. We have never, that I know, discussed the rights of beings not classified as dark. I support the discussion. Dumbledore clapped his hands together. Topic announced and supported. Let the discussion into creature rights begin. And for the next 2 hours, Harry found that he did have an influence after all. Aura Vaughn met him at the door as he left. The minister would like a word, Lord Potter. Harry only nodded his head, feeling far more tired than he thought he would be. 6 hours of bureaucracy would do that to anyone. He leaned on his staff as he followed the blue-green pattern into the lifts, stopping occasionally when one member or another came up to speak to him, speaking in carefully composed words of their support for his cause. No one dared disagree with him face to face. Those that had spoken out most against new laws regulating house elf employment had purposefully left by another door. He had no doubt that he was being pandered to, that half of the so-called supporters only wanted to make sure the blind sorcerer did not turn a look at them. "We're going down," Aura Vaughn said at last, and blocked anyone else from entering before the doors closed on the lift. Harry said nothing. He stared ahead into white and purple magic, the elaborate spellwork that ran the lifts, and slipped easily into calming meditation. He wished he had brought his cloak. Next time he would, despite the plum dress code. He looked down at the stone on his finger, a prism of black and white. He thought of nothing until the lift doors opened. Then he followed the Bangladesh hue until they met the Chartreuse minister in his office of varying shades of verdant green, waiting calmly behind golden wards. He sat. Harry let out a sigh. He somehow was not surprised when Vaughan closed the door but remained inside the room. "I see you've decided to take my advice." The minister's words were both congratulatory and chiding at the same time. Harry's lips lifted in a half-smile. "You said I could influence the world, so I have." The man laughed. "And I suppose you know how these things really work. Networking, lobbying, bribes and favors." Harry finished. "Everyone wants my favor, and no one wants my ire. The public still loves me. This cause is one I predict all of the Muggle-born demographic will support. Once I have a sample of the registry's current contract published on the front page of the Daily Prophet, the free-thinking contingent will easily raise an uproar. If I get a good reporter to compare house elves and human servants, all the better. The house elf registry is well funded. Several families make a good deal of money in that business. There is always going to be money behind evil practices. The Muggle world is not that different from the wizarding one in that respect." The minister ruffled papers on his desk. "They might pay off the Daily Prophet. They will stage protests of any new laws. Then I'll pay the Prophet more, and I'll go to their protests personally and see how many will look me in the eye." Scrimgeour hissed between his teeth. "I do not support intimidation tactics, Mr. Potter." "Isn't that what a protest is?" Harry returned. "Showing the boss that the employees outnumber him 100 to 1. Why this? Why did you choose this to be your grand entrance into government?" Harry narrowed his eyes. "Because I have a house elf, an old one loyal. He has his own personality, his own views independent of my own. He has feelings. He wears a pillowcase proudly because to him it's a mark of his pride. A pillowcase. Because he has wanted to see a garden since he was a child minister. And if I hadn't asked him, hadn't given him the time, he would never see a garden again in his life." The silence grew. Harry looked away, into wooden walls of swirling green, the outlines of metal picture frames standing in purple relief. "I see." Scrimgeour tapped his desk. "Well then, I support you in this instance. I have no doubt that when a vote is raised at the December quarter you will be successful. But this won't stop with house elves. Next it will be goblins, velas, werewolves, then the vampires and the merpeople and the centaurs, dwarfs and giants. There are many sentient beings, Mr. Potter, and not all of them are kind. Not all house elves are kind, either. We've merely beaten them nearly to extinction. There is a reason they are so expensive to buy. Give them their freedom, and no doubt some rogue house elves will arrive. But that does not mean their species do not deserve that freedom." "Will you raise that same argument for werewolves then? Or what about when a vampire wants his freedom to kill?" Harry shook his head. "One species, freedom does not trump another's. No sentient species should be free to kill another sentient species. Vampires can sustain life without killing. Werewolves can take precautions and are completely safe on all but one night. We should not punish them based on their capability for destruction. Wizarding kind is by far the most dangerous of them all." And you are the most dangerous of wizarding kind, the minister questioned softly. That's what the papers think. If I was my predecessor, I would punish you for that, and no doubt goad you into just such destruction. I only want you to be prepared for the arguments you will face. You have spearheaded this debate. Do not disappear once you have won your house elves their rights. I take responsibility, Harry said simply. Good. In that respect, so do I, which is why I suggest you accept a guard, if not hire your own security, for any subsequent trips to the ministry. You won't keep the public's favor for long when you start lobbying for the rights of a werewolf who might gobble up their children. If you think it's necessary for appearances, I do, Scrimgeour said forcefully. And not just for appearances. You can't be on your guard every hour of every day. And you will soon learn that being in the public eye does not put just yourself in danger. Who watches your family, Mr. Potter, when you are not there? Harry felt a cold shiver run down his back. Exactly. The minister nodded. Wards work, but only to dissuade. Any truly determined party can find their way through them eventually. Think on what I've said. Harry stood, hearing the dismissal. Thank you, Minister. You've been kind. Scrimgeour rose, a tall yellow-green pattern as regal as a lion. I'll ask you a favor one day, perhaps sooner than you think. I am not always kind. Neither am I, Harry murmured, thinking of souls and their destruction. Sometimes you can't be. Exactly, Mr. Potter. That's exactly right. Harry followed Vaughn out, paused at the lifts. I suppose you are ready for guard detail once again. The man mashed a purple prick of light, spoke musingly. I've been considering a move to private security. I've heard rumors the benefits are far superior. Is that so? Harry said softly. They might just be. Hermione read the paper aloud to her parents over breakfast. She couldn't keep the pride from her voice. She had been told most of it by Harry, but it was somehow more official to see it printed, and overwhelming to see how much support the cause was already raising. Well done. Her dad mumbled over his toast. Well said. We should make him something, throw a party. Her mother declared, her answer to most important events. Good grades, eat, birthday, eat, lost a tooth, eat. Of course, being a dentist, any dessert was always sugar-free. That made the cakes and cookies a little less spectacular. Mrs. Dursley, on the other hand, used real everything. I'll talk to Petunia. She continued, and Hermione laughed. It was just opening comments, Mum. Won't vote until December. It was your boyfriend's first public speech in government. That's a cause for celebration. 17-year-olds don't belong in government, her dad muttered. But I guess it is. She resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Her dad had been vocal enough about how backwards wizarding government was, to her and Harry both. And while she did agree with him, she saw no reason to not use it to her advantage anyway. Oh, hush with you. Her mum laughed, then reached for the phone. Hermione smiled. She wouldn't argue. Harry stood in his laboratory, listening to the snake in fascination. It smells like meat. It smells like meat. Feed me meat. The small garden snake circled again and again in its glass cage, repeating its running commentary on events. It's dark, it's time for hunting, it smells like meat. I'm hungry, feed me. In another cage, a small brown mouse squeaked in alarm. It could hear the hissing. You're hungry. Harry questioned, and the snake paused. Its coloring was typical for a non-magical snake. Orange fading into blue, a combination that made a murky brown from far away, similar to many other animals. Reptiles in general tended to be shades of orange, while amphibians tended to lean towards blue. Snakes of some species were more orange, others more blue. This one was predominantly dull orange. Nowhere near the magical brilliance of a dragon, but a very inferior and distant cousin. Another snake. Food. My food. I smell it. I'm hungry. It's mine. Well, that answered that. It wasn't just magical varieties of snakes he could hear, but non-magical ones as well. And both were able to understand him as they could any other snake. Unfortunately, the Parseltongue ability did not seem very useful. Snakes talked about little other than food, mating, and sleep. Non-magicals especially. He could not imagine having one as a pet and be forced to listen to a constant litany of food, sex, sleep, sleep. How had Voldemort been able to stand it? Or had the snakes he kept been what had driven him over the edge of sanity? I smell meat. He could believe it. With a sigh, Harry stood, exiting his lab with a grimace. Outside the door, Creature waited patiently. Return them to the bestiary with my thanks. Does Master wish another breed? Creature questioned, and Harry waved him away. No, thanks, not right now. Tomorrow I'd like to try another magical breed, whatever the man thinks is most intelligent. The yellow light bended and then swirled, a bow turning into transportation. Harry turned into the living room, falling gracelessly onto the couch, a week of careful experimentation. The only concrete gift he found in common with the soul attached to his own was Parseltongue, and arguably that could have been inherited from some distant ancestor. All the old bloodlines were intermarried, and many magical gifts had been known to skip entire generations. The Dark Lord had also been known to have a specialty in necromancy, of course, and a talent for dark magic. But never had Harry found any reference to the kind of sight he himself had, and he did not consider himself to have a talent for dark magic. He wasn't sure he even agreed on the classification of some magic as dark. Necromancy, on the other hand, was definitely a specialty of his, whether he acknowledged it or not. Harry ran a finger across his face, fingers exploring the grooves across his cheeks and nose and eyes, worse across the bridge of his nose, cutting right into the cartilage. It was entirely possible he had limited olfactory senses, though no doctor had ever mentioned it, splitting the hair of his eyebrows in 3 places, marking the high points of his cheekbones. Spiderweb thin lines he could barely feel by touch, making jagged lines down to his eyes from the deeper grooves above and below. A Horcrux scar. It had to be the reason for his sight, somehow, someway. It had most certainly blinded him. The Muggle doctors had proven his eyes did not react to stimuli. The pupils had no reaction to true light, did not track movement correctly. Harry could move them, but he also knew he did not have to. He could focus his eyes directly ahead and still look to the side, though the focus required gave him a headache. His eyes were as ruined as the skin around them. Removing the Horcrux would not change that. And after his studies in occlumency, he did not think removing the Horcrux would change his sight, either. His sight was mental, and the Horcrux, while leaving an effect on his mind, was not actively influencing it in any way. It was no more manipulating his thoughts and memories than it was allowing him to see. And even if the Parseltongue was not an inherited ability, but another effect of the Horcrux, it too would not be lost. What damage had been done to his mind would stay, as he had mentioned to Hermione. Now he just needed to bring up the new language he had discovered to her. It's hard to imagine how a language can be inherited, Hermione said, and he heard the tap of her ink pen against the paper. Can it be written as well? Snakes inherit the ability to speak it. I doubt it can be written, though. How can snakes write? How can people hiss like snakes? Hermione countered. And when you speak it, I notice certain repeated syllables. I think it can be learned just like any other language, or at least understood and translated. The speaking part would be difficult, as parts of the sound registers do not seem possible with human tongues. But I bet if you repeated a particular phrase enough, I could learn what you mean when you speak. Harry glanced at the boomslang that currently graced his lab. It wasn't as inane as the garden snake had been, or as dull and one-minded as the ashwinder. It also didn't argue constantly as the runespore had. It simply lay curled up, a small dark orange sliver of light. Highly venomous, dangerous enough it had come in a double-layered cage of glass and metal both, harvested from breeders who raised them exclusively for various expensive potions. Are you going to say anything? Harry asked it, and was rewarded only with silence. Was it possible for snakes to be deaf? Hermione sighed. You're right, though. Not much use to talk to snakes unless you have one as a pet, or are raising them for money. I'd rather be able to talk to, say, dragons or fish. Imagine what a fish could tell you. Where the best ponds are, how comfortable the water is, Harry teased, and saw blue-violet light ripple in response. How about, where is that undiscovered shipwreck holding hundreds of pounds of gold? Or help me find this guy lost at sea. You could ask a snake to find you a kid lost in the woods. Hermione huffed. Better yet, the ability to talk to dogs. They can find a kid in the woods a lot faster than a slithering snake. And they are soft, furry, and lovable. They also probably talk about food and sex as much as the snakes do, which is all the time. I would hate to be able to hear animals talk. It would drive me mad. Hermione laughed, the sound echoing in the laboratory like happy rays of light. Except this one. It doesn't talk at all. Harry glanced at the boomslang. Silent but deadly. I'm betting it's twice as intelligent as the ashwinder. I swear that snake was so desperate to procreate before it died it was about to try breeding with me. You slipped into Parseltongue again. Its trigger is sight. Harry shrugged apologetically. Sorry, I guess I'm done here. Nothing new to learn. Yeah, Hermione stood. Lunch, it's Saturday. Harry nodded, taking hold of his staff. I'll get Creature to take the snake back. Hermione hesitated at the door. If you have to have a pet snake now, please don't settle on the boomslang just because it's quiet. I'd find you dead one day from a bite. Not a chance. I think I prefer to guess what any animals I own are thinking. But he did look back at the boomslang one more time. There was one more use he could see a wizard or witch having for Parseltongue. Snakes would make excellent assassins, but he didn't need one of those. Quite the opposite. Harry visited the Daily Prophet's offices 3 times the month of October. The first was to hand over a sample contract. The second was to give an interview about his views on sentient creatures. The third was in response to what was amping up to be a slur campaign against him funded by the House Elf Registry's financial backers. And on that third visit, Harry took Matthew Vaughn with him, their ex-Sora now proudly the head of his new security team of 2. Fergus Follen had only been a second behind his partner in taking a position. Harry doubted the minister was happy that he had recruited 2 of his auras out from under his nose, but he also had no doubt that the minister had orchestrated it either. There was no such thing as coincidence with Rufus Scrimgeour. Is it true, Lord Potter, that you practice illegal dark magic? The female reporter's voice wobbled. The purple of her pattern seemed to be trying to make itself as small as possible. That is a ridiculous question, Harry replied calmly. No one who did such a thing would admit it where they could be charged with a crime. You should ask the registry instead how they would feel if their children got their fingers broken every time they disobeyed a command to clean their room. She coughed, cleared her throat. Yes, well, Mr. Burke, who owns several shops and a majority share in the registry, thinks house elves should not be compared to children or any of humankind. He said, and I quote, "House elves are an unintelligent species that relies on wizarding kind to fulfill their basic needs. They should be happy we are so accommodating as to welcome them into our homes." He also said, many families rely on the cheap and discreet labor provided by house elves, and to restructure their contracts would cost the shopkeepers of Diagon Alley alone thousands of galleons in cleaning costs. First, Harry began. Children rely on their parents to fulfill their basic needs. Young children are far less intelligent than adult house elves, as they cannot speak, feed themselves, or change their own soiled diapers. Perhaps Mr. Burke thinks his own children are blessed to be welcomed into his home as babies. Purple light shifted, flickered as she wrote quickly. Harry had specified no quick quotes quills. Second, house elves are not cheap. While they may cost nothing if they are inherited, to buy a new one is exorbitant. Diagon Alley shopkeepers collectively own what is referred to by them as a stable of elves. These elves were bought generations ago and bred over time, with the children not allowed to move on to other employment or sold for increased profit and forced to leave their parents and family. These elves are forced to clean the alley and shops of anyone who pays rent for the stable's services. The Diagon Alley shopkeepers have therefore been making money from the backs of what amounts to slave labor. The elves in this stable have no rights to food, wages, or entertainment of any kind. They are not allowed to learn to read or write. They are given just enough to keep them alive and their magic functioning. Harry paused, waiting for the reporter to catch up. Then he looked at her, saw her face flinch slightly, her fingers tighten on her quill. Quietly, he continued, looking into eyes that were now green from his own energy. And madam, when these elves grow too old to work, when the beatings no longer spur them to clean, when their magic is wasted from decades of labor, they are killed. This is done with an executioner hired from the ministry for the purpose. The old elves are taken from their family group and magically beheaded. These heads are then offered back to the family, who are commanded to put them in so-called places of honor as a reminder of their service, of their slavery. They are told it is an honor. And they believe it because they do not know anything else. I understand, my lord. Her voice trembled. Harry let his look fade as she began to quickly write, her natural light flickering madly. No more questions, Lord Potter. This came from a male voice, significantly calmer than the woman. It was the reporter who had run the first interview after the Weisengamot session. I believe that will cover it. Harry stood slowly. I would appreciate that any pieces that directly attack myself with criminal accusations be brought to ministry attention. Defamation of a Weisengamot member is illegal unless said accusations have been proven by trial. You can't stop free speech. The wizard said, everyone has their opinion, as long as they label them as opinions and not fact. Harry warned. Or is this paper nothing more than a gossip rag? The woman sucked in a scandalized breath. The Daily Prophet is the most respected and widely read paper in Wizarding Britain. We do not lie. Harry gestured to the green parchment she had been writing on. Everything I have told you is fact. You can research it yourself. I encourage you to. Find out just what is happening to these creatures, not just in the alley, but everywhere. I guarantee that a bloodthirsty public would buy your papers until none are left to read it. He turned and left, the green of Vaughan following close behind. That man looks fit to murder you, my lord. The guard murmured as they entered the alley. Harry snorted. They lie constantly, or they truly are idiotic enough to believe everything they are told and reprint it without due diligence. It's about time someone confronted them about it, or they will never change. And call me Harry. I get enough pandering from the public. Harry, it's not wise to make enemies of the media. There is more than one paper in Wizarding Britain, and I haven't made an enemy of any of them. They need me to sell their papers. If I stop giving them interviews and go to the competition, it will drastically hurt their profits. They know it, and so do I, and as the sea of people parted to let them through, Harry heard the occasional shout from either side. Free the house elves. Wages. Lord Potter, it's the blind sorcerer. House elves are people too. October was a success. Viola is going to write a paper, Hermione declared, thumping one hand upon the book in her lap. She's well respected in academic circles. It would not be out of the realm of possibility that she would comment on recent events. I use magical theory to prove my point. She watched as Harry lifted his head, blinked at her, his long black hair wild and spiky from laying against the couch cushions. Okay, he said simply. Hermione bit the side of her lip, thoughts tumbling one over another. On a magical level, what is so different? On a physical level, even, house elves even live longer than the average witch or wizard. They have their own culture, their own traditions. I'm going to write a paper on house elves. Harry leaned back down, nodded. That's a good idea. I'm going to keep it as scientific as possible. I'll try to keep emotions out of it. Harry scoffed, but she continued speaking. I will. I've done it before. I can do this. And it won't just be about house elves either. It will be about the basic rights of any sentient being. What is so special about witches and wizards that they are the only ones allowed to have the freedom of choosing their own jobs, the place they live, the ability to use a wand. Harry's eyes stared straight ahead, but Hermione felt the touch of his energy like a caress. You're brilliant. It's a good thing no one knows who Viola is, though, or we would be hiring another guard. Hermione flexed her fingers, idly ran one over her wand harness. I thought you were overreacting until I heard about the near riot at the elf stables yesterday. They had to call the Auras. Someone is going to get hurt. Worse, the contract holders can command the elves to hurt anyone who might try to free them. The ministry has not yet seemed to consider that house elves can make a ready-made army. Hermione bared her teeth. Maybe I should let them know. Harry smiled. Oh, Viola, you do love to stir the pot, don't you? Hermione set the book aside, picked up her pen, stared at the blank paper like it was a canvas, and she the artist waiting to create a masterpiece. Only for a good cause. House elves, beasts of burden, loyal servants, or potential weapons. By Viola James it was genius, really. The kind of brilliance only Hermione Granger could translate onto paper. She made house elves into family units. She made them people. She gave them wants and dreams, nightmares and horrors. Viola gave them all the proof she could gather. She talked of a species so similar to humankind that they bore most of the same body parts, had brains, held memories. She described elf magic, their molecular transportation, an echo of apparition. How they worked wandless cleaning and repairing charms in the same manner as any witch or wizard would with a wand. She detailed an attempt to teach one elf transfiguration and the success that was achieved. Then she laid out the future as she saw it. The horrible potential of taking an intelligent and magically powerful race and making them slaves, making them suffer, making them cry. taking their children away, their spouses, their parents. She described what might happen one day when house elves decided they would no longer be bound. It would only take one, she theorized. One elf who lost everything. One elf who slipped through the contract. One elf who hated wizards instead of worshipped them. One elf to lead a populations of thousands into revolt against overlords who thought them nothing but pesky, stupid, weak, invisible servants. Or worse, so much worse, one witch who promised elves everything they did not have if they would only follow her. One witch who would give them their freedom if they would help her overthrow a government. 1,000 elves capable of wandless magic, who had no reason to trust or love wizarding kind. No population of slaves remained so forever, Viola wrote. History tells us it is so. Don't create your own downfall. House elves once worked by their own choice. Give it back to them. Vote for elf freedom. Vote for elf freedom, the words rallied, chanted. The first week of November, Viola wrote her paper. That weekend, the first VFEF posters had been found posted to the door of every shop in Diagon Alley. The second week, 5 pureblood families came forward and demanded the ability to rewrite the contracts for their own elves. The third week, one house elf defied his mistress to give an interview to the press, detailing the punishments he went through, even as he systematically was forced to break each and every one of his fingers. The prophet ran the story with a picture of the elf, labeled as graphic, children beware. The elf declared he wanted 3 nuts in wages a month, socks for clothing, and 1 day of vacation a year. The reporter emotionally quoted that the elf declared those 3 things were worth the extraordinary price of pain that he was going through throughout the interview. The fourth week, vandals attacked the house elf registry, breaking every window and spelling VFEF in bold letters across the storefront. On the cobblestone pavement, a drawing was spelled of a sobbing elf being beheaded by a grinning executioner. Bloody letters spelled out murderers. By December, while Hermione was taking her fall semester's final exams, the supporters of the registry were lobbying for ministry protection. They feared for their lives. The sole protest staged on their behalf had nearly turned into a riot until the blind sorcerer himself appeared, a single house elf at his side, and told the people to let the ministry give the elves justice first. Let the Wisengamot vote. It took only 4 months for a population that dismissed house elves to begin to champion them instead. Do you think people would be this agitated if it would have been someone other than you to suggest it? Hermione asked. They sat in the dining room, the plates cleared and gone, a single candle burning between them in brilliant scarlet flecks of light. Yes, eventually. Harry rolled the ring on his finger, the soft metal purple and warm. Most people don't even know what situation the house elves are in. Most people don't own house elves, and the elves are not asking for freedom not to work. They want to. They merely want to also have a family and live a life devoid of pain. Most people can see that, believe in it, support it. The only ones who would be hurt by new legislation are those abusing their house elves, and those who profit from the sale of them. And by the numbers, those are the far, far minority of witches and wizards. With the freedom to have wages also comes the freedom to refuse them. Hermione sighed. Creature, Harry smiled. He won't ever take wages. I dare say most house elves won't. The one in the prophet was a wild card, perhaps just the kind of wild card that might have snapped like Viola's paper predicted. Darby. Hermione's light jerked in a nod. They found out which family owned him, the Malfoys. If the legislation passes, Narcissa Malfoy could be in trouble with the ministry for his treatment. It was. Gruesome, that interview. Harry shook his head. I read more that came out this morning. She went to the prophet. The punishment was stipulated by the former Lord, not Lady Malfoy, and he's already in prison. She cannot rewrite his contract as it stands until it is voided by the ministry. Easy way out, Hermione muttered. Malfoys like loopholes and backdoors. Most people won't be affected by the change. In a way, this is the easiest case of rights to get updated. Despite your paper, it's hard for most wizards to think of elves as dangerous, and much easier to look at them with pity. It will be much harder for any other species. Like goblins, Hermione mused, and werewolves. It seems like this is just the beginning. Harry leaned back in his chair, watching Red consume the brown wax. Maybe, I, for one, will be glad to take a few weeks' vacation from it all after the meeting and exams. Your classes? Hermione asked, guiltily. I haven't even asked with everything else going on. He waved a hand. Nothing important to say. I'm working for a degree so that people will take me seriously when I talk about what I know. Even the muggle world has hoops one has to jump through. All right. She stood, coming around the table to slip into the chair beside him. I guess you didn't think you would get this involved in politics. I don't want to be. I wouldn't be good at it either, except for my reputation. People are forced to listen to me. Hermione took his hands, her skin soft, stilling the continuous movement of the ring around his finger. Will you still go to the Wisengamot meetings once they vote on this? Harry squeezed her hand. I was told by the minister to not disappear. I think he's right, but I'm not a politician. I'm a scientist. She leaned her face into his, and he felt her smile against his lips. My scientist. Good to know you are still you. Always. He whispered the promise into her mouth. That night after Hermione had left, Harry sat alone in his lab, his various works in progress scattered about on tables, green notes piles on shelves in brown binders. He knew as much about Horcruxes as he could find. What was in the Black Library, along with what books could be found in Nocturne Alley. He knew about souls. He knew how to destroy them and how to split them. He could guess how to make one of his own. And he even figured he could make a Horcrux for another person if he needed to. He just needed to know how to get rid of one that he could not see. He had never felt so blind as when he realized he had to rely on a pensieve to observe his own self. A mirror for the soul. He leaned back in his chair, absently flinging the cloak over his face, and relaxed into the spiderweb of light. Where is he? Vaughn's strident voice roused him. Harry stood up and groaned, stiff as a board from a night spent sleeping in a chair that was comfortable enough for sitting, but not so much for sleeping. Master Potter is in the laboratory. Creature's voice came from the open doorway. Harry pulled the cloak off his head and blinked groggily over as Bangladesh Green came into sight. Wah, time ist. Early. There has been an incident regarding the house elf registry. Head Aura Robards and the minister wish to speak with you. Harry felt some of the fuzziness fall away as he dragged himself to his feet. Incident. Vaughn cleared his throat. I wasn't told the details as I'm no longer on the force, but Mr. Burke's dead, murdered. Harry's gaze sharpened into a look, and he saw the creases of his guard's face settled into grim lines. Let me get dressed. Creature. Yellow grasped his hand and took him to his room without hesitation, before scurrying to the closet to drag out fresh robes as he undressed. You didn't do anything, Master Potter. They can't blame anything on you. Harry remembered, clearly, the minister's tone of voice when he spoke of favors. I don't think they would be asking politely for a visit if they thought I did it. This is something else. Creature doesn't like it, this murder business. Who does? Harry said, before turning for the stairs, his voice echoing behind him. It's not very nice.